Hi everyone. Good to see you on my channel today. Today I will tell you a wonderful story. It is full of love and kindness. I hope you enjoy it and I wish you an enjoyable viewing experience. Thank you.
In a comfortable paid ward, an elderly gray-haired man lay under an IV drip. His face was contorted with pain. The door opened and Emily's daughter walked in. A woman of 35 years of attractive appearance and figure, always well-groomed and fashionably dressed. Only her red eyes gave away that she had been crying and hadn't gotten enough sleep. Emily set the bag by the nightstand and sat down on the edge of the bed. Kissing her father on the cheek, she asked kindly, "Good morning, Daddy. Are you feeling a little better today? I'm so worried about you. Not only has this disease been plaguing you for so many years, but you have stomach problems. I talked to the doctor yesterday. He told me to follow a strict diet. So I brought everything on the list. Oatmeal and water and steamed vegetables. No meat for now." Ben's face at the sight of his daughter immediately brightened. Even the pain seemed to have receded. He replied, "Thank you, Sunshine, for caring. You are the only one I have left, a light in the window. I don't feel like eating yet. Maybe later. Why don't you tell me how things are going at the bank? What's Jason saying? Did he do the deal like I told him to? Are you okay?" Emily started to talk about the situation. "Don't worry. Jason's working. He's not home much. He's got reports or business meetings, or whatever. He's complaining that he's never officially made bank director. He doesn't like the fact that I work by proxy too. I'm going on a business trip in a couple of weeks to negotiate the delivery of tomographs. So far, so good. I wish you'd get better soon, and it would be wonderful." William stroked his daughter's arm and said, "Don't let Jason take his time. It's too soon to write me off. He's already in charge of everything. He'll be a principal in time. And the fact that you don't see each other much is bad. I'll be dead before I have grandchildren. You better hurry up. You're getting too old. Daughter, after Laura died, I raised you, lived for you, and was so happy to have you. A child is such a gift from fate for life." Emily didn't like this talk. She herself realized it was high time she had a baby, but if only it were that simple. So the woman hurriedly changed the subject, persuaded her father to eat a couple of spoonfuls of porridge and ran off to work. On the way, she remembered her childhood, her youth, their relationship with her father, and tried to understand why they had become strangers lately. Emily's father was a well-known bank owner in town. He raised her alone. Her mother died very young. The girl was only 3 years old. She hardly remembered her and stared at the huge portrait on the wall of her father's bedroom. Emily imagined what she was like, how she was loved by her father, who never remarried. For that, Emily was very grateful to him. There was no way she wanted to see another woman in the house, much less call her mom. Daddy had a private life, of course, but it never came to marriage. As he himself confessed more than once, he never met someone like his beloved Laura. He loved his wife very much and cherished the memories of her in his soul. Over the years, even her bedroom remained untouched in the mansion. No servants were allowed to go in there. Papa or Emily cleaned it themselves. It was just as it had been when Mom was alive. Her robe hung on the chair as if she'd stepped out for a moment. Her favorite perfume and cosmetics on the nightstand. My father often went there and sat there for long periods of time, sighing heavily and remembering how happy he and Laura had been. Emily studied well, pleased her father with her successes. University graduated with honors. She had an entrepreneurial spirit since childhood. She already in high school managed to earn good money, making classmates control or cheat sheets for exams. Her father tried not to spoil Emily, although there was every opportunity to do so. It was important to him that she learn to make her own way in life, and of course, to marry well. William tried several times to invite to their home for dinner potential matchmakers with their offspring, those whom he himself would like to see as Emily's companions. But the girl was with a temper and no way did not want such relationships, deliberately spoiled the evening, avoided socializing. Emily read women's novels and sincerely believed that she herself will feel when she meets the one destined for her fate. After university, she opened her own small business with the help of her father. She was engaged in selling medical equipment and its installation, often went on business trips. And in one of them, in a small resort town, she met her future husband, Jason. He was not rich at all, worked as a simple manager in the clinic where she brought ultrasound machines. The guy was showering her with compliments and wooing her so assertively and confidently, as if he knew for sure that Emily could not resist. He managed to surprise her without having a lot of money. He arranged a terrific picnic in nature and then with a breeze ride on a motorboat on the river. Everything was so easy and romantic, and Emily fell in love completely. The fiancé agreed to move easily, especially since she already had an apartment. Her father helped her. Soon they met their father-in-law. Jason seemed to William a good guy, simple, smart, and he decided to slowly bring him into his business, to teach him the banking business, so that then in his old age he could hand over all the business. Who would turn down such a prospect? Jason was happy and at first very grateful to his father-in-law, and in general, he was satisfied with a well-fed and comfortable life. And in his work he was not lazy, tried and succeeded. The couple played a lavish wedding. There were the press and photographers. The groom proudly hugged his bride by the waist and did not let her go for a second. The girl was happy. Everything had come true just as she had dreamed. She was in love with Jason, and he was so in love with her. It was like a fairy tale. For the first few years it was. Jason went into business, absorbed his father-in-law's knowledge and experience like a sponge. He did not forget about his wife. They often went on vacation together. He ran home from work to his beautiful wife. After all, in fact, everything that he had, he was directly indebted to her. But as you know, everything gets old. And after 5 years, Jason began to change. He felt like the master of his life. He felt like he'd always been that way. The passion between the couple had cooled. They were both businessmen. The whole day was scheduled to the minute. And when they met late at night, they discussed the current situation at work over dinner. It had been a long time since anyone had called anyone affectionately. It was just the same old, same old. Emily didn't want children herself at first. She thought that there was no need to hurry and that she could safely protect herself until the age of 30. But then she began to think, and for what? In fact, they lived together with her husband, earning money. All acquaintances have had children for a long time, and a lot of them. Emily decided that it was time for her and Jason to have children. But deciding is one thing, having a baby is another. And her father was getting worse. His condition had been slowly deteriorating over the last few years. Strong pain in the joints, stiffened movements. Periodically, he was treated in the hospital department. Lindson's relief came, but not for long. It was during this time that Emily became pregnant. But against the background of severe stress and worry, alas, there was a miscarriage. The term was very small. The couple decided, it's okay, it happens, but after that incident, Emily could not get pregnant again. And it depressed her a lot. Relationships with her husband have recently been very difficult. It was as if they were reluctant to communicate with each other. Her husband kept resenting the fact that he had to work by proxy. Emily wanted to be a full-fledged bank director, and Daddy was getting worse. It seemed that all his chronic diseases had worsened and decided to attack his whole body at once. Emily had heard many rumors behind his back that Jason was truant. The secretaries and the accountant had hinted about it more than once, but the woman didn't believe it. There were no obvious signs of infidelity. Although their relationship had fallen apart, all families go through crisis periods. You just have to get through it. She arrived home in the evening, much later than her husband. There was a lot to do. He tried to fry eggs, but almost burned the frying pan, threw it in the sink, and shouted, "Emily, where the hell have you been? Your beloved husband came in hungry and the fridge is empty. How long are you going to live like this? I'm sick of it." Maybe it's time you started working on your home instead of staying in your office all day and night. What a businesswoman. The woman took offense, opened the window wide open, waved a towel to get the fumes out quickly, and she became indignant. Good evening to you too, sweetheart. You're not a little kid, and it's not my fault that you can't handle scrambled eggs without starting a fire. You could have ordered dinner at a restaurant, and the fridge isn't empty. There's soup and cutlets in there. You could have heated them up. You can't blame me for my job. I like it, and I'm not going to give it up. You're not home all day either. So what? I'm supposed to sit in four walls by myself. If we're going to make a change in our lives, it has to be a big one for both of us. Would you at least ask me how my day was, how my dad's feeling? I'll get you dinner. Wait half an hour. She got up and started cutting vegetables for the salad and heating up cutlets. Her spouse sat down at the table and tried to smooth things I'm sorry, Emily, I'm wrong. It's just been such a hard day. Everything's falling apart, and I forgot to put oil in the frying pan. It was starting to smoke. So I got angry. How's William? Did you see him today? What did the doctors say? Let me help you with something. Handfuls, the woman did not know how to be angry for long. She kissed her husband and replied, No, I'll manage on my own. We'd better drink some wine. We both need to relax a little. It's not an easy time. Dad's not doing much better, even though the doctors are doing everything they can. He's already lost 10 pounds with these diets. He can't eat anything. And now I have to go on a business trip. It's a good deal. What about Dad? I don't know yet. You're at the bank all the time, and Daddy needs to see you every day. He needs attention, you know? Jason immediately cheered up, his mood improving, and he began to reassure his wife. Why are you making a monster out of me? Go if you have to, and don't worry about anything. I will go to my father-in-law faithfully. I'll be there for you. It's going to be okay, honey. I'm here for you. They ate with gusto and watched a romantic movie, and the rest of the evening passed quietly. But Emily was still uneasy. She'd known Jason for years, and she'd noticed that he'd been very excited to see her go. There was a reason for that, but work is work. She'd warned her dad that she'd be gone for a while. He understood everything and blessed her. He was trying to be cheerful in front of her. He didn't want to upset the child, but he was in terrible pain, and also his heart. Sometimes he couldn't breathe at all. Emily had been driving for many years. She drove confidently and wasn't afraid to drive alone, even long distances. The route was standard and well-traveled. She always bypassed the usual multi-kilometer traffic jam, except that the weather had completely deteriorated. It was raining like a bucket, windy and cold, and the country road was completely washed out. On the next bump, the car drove sharply to the edge. A muffled bump was heard. Something hard hit it. The tire pressure gauge beeped sharply. That's unfortunate. Looks like a flat tire. That's all I need. I put the insurance out the other day when I brought the equipment in and never put it back. Navigator says it's a couple of kilometers to the village on foot and not a soul around. It's exactly the same. Emily. She threw the hood of her coat back on and got out of the car. Indeed, the tire was flat and the disc was up. She gazed into the distance, trying to make out any buildings or lights through the shroud of rain, but as luck would have it, nothing was visible. The woman tried to call for a tow truck, but the connection was cut off and they couldn't hear her. They couldn't make out what she was saying. Emily sat in the salon for an hour, not knowing what to do. It was getting dark outside. Then finally she heard the sound of an engine. A tractor was coming down the road. She jumped out of the cabin and started waving her arms, trying to attract the driver's attention and praying that he would notice her and stop. Finally, the tractor slowed down. A young, neat-looking guy climbed out of the cab. "Good evening, daughter. What's the matter with you? Something wrong with the car?" Emily replied frustratedly, "Hello. Yes, there's a problem with the tire. I don't have a spare tire, and I can't call anyone. I can't even call a tow truck. What to do? I don't know what to do. It's a little scary to spend the night." "Yeah, things are bad, sure. You know what? You see that fence over there? There's a hangar next to it where fertilizer is stored. It's guarded. Let's leave your car there. And in the morning, I'll go to the tire shop, ask the guys to help. And here's what we'll do with you. Get into my cabin." The eyes of the drenched woman read fear and excitement. "Don't be afraid. I'm Mike the tractor driver. Every dog knows me here, no matter who you ask. I'll take you to Grandma Susan's place in the village. She'll take you to stay with her. She's my neighbor. She's a good woman. She's kind. She won't say no." Emily didn't know how to thank this helpful guy. "Thank you, Mike. Oh, and my name is Emily." And here I was getting pretty desperate. "Maybe we'll get better reception in the village. I'll pay for the night. It's really scary to be out on the road alone. It's the first time I've had such a force majeure." The boy drove her to a small house, knocked on the window, explained the situation to the grandmother. She nodded and waved for Emily to come in. "Come in, sweetheart. Don't be afraid of the dog. Rex is old like me. He doesn't bite anymore. Oh, you're all wet. Now I'll give you a warm robe. Go get dressed. We'll dry your clothes over the stove overnight." Emily thanked Susan and went to change into the small bedroom. There in the crib slept a baby about 3 years old, no more. He coughed a lot in his sleep and breathed through his mouth all the time. His nose was stuffy. It was obvious to the naked eye that the baby was sick. Emily asked worriedly, "Susan, is this your grandson? The boy is coughing a lot and has a fever. I touched his forehead. It's all hot. Have you called a doctor? What are you treating the child with?" The old woman sighed heavily. "Where did we get a doctor from? The medical center is under repair. I know I have to go to the city myself, but I'm 80 years old now. My legs can't carry me. I don't know if I'll make it. I cry day and night in front of icons. I pray for my grandson's health. I make herbs for him." Emily wondered, where are Jack's parents? Why are you raising him alone? Don't they care what happens to their son? The old woman frowned. "It's a long story. Well, I'll tell it if you want. In the meantime, have some oatmeal porridge. I've got some fresh oatmeal. My Tom and I lived our whole lives together, working on the farm. But God never gave us children. We waited and waited, and then we stopped. We had a daughter when we thought that was it. They were both in their 50s, and all the villagers were pointing their fingers at them. Are you out of your mind, Susan? You're out of your mind to have a baby in your old age." They couldn't understand what it was like to wait and pray for him all their lives. And then what? Kill it. So we took the risk. We didn't listen to anyone. We had a daughter. Emily's had a weak heart since she was a baby. I don't know if it's because I had her so late or what. My husband, Tom, died early. My daughter, Emily, was only 5, so I raised her on my own. Loved her. Took great care of her. Didn't work too hard. After school, Emily went to the city to earn money. She didn't want to stay in the village. She thought there were no prospects here. She got a job as a waitress in a cafe. She called often, saying that everything was fine, that she had found a fiancé. She warned me, though, that he was much older than her, but that he really loved her. I even rejoiced, thinking that if he was older, he was responsible, so he wasn't some stupid young man. I kept waiting for Emily to ask me to the wedding soon. 3 years later, my daughter came back alone, with a belly as big as her nose. She fell at my feet, crying. Her scumbag fiancé left her. He turned out to be married. Obviously, why have a child on the side? He made her get an abortion. So they had a fight. She didn't dare to take the sin on her soul to get rid of the child. She dragged it out till the last minute. I, of course, forgave her, accepted her, after all. But my Emily didn't survive the birth. She died right there. Her heart failed. How I grieved, how I fought back. They wanted to take my grandson to an orphanage, saying I was old, but I fought back. I raised Jack alone, but every year it gets harder and harder. I have blood pressure, my joints twist, my hearing has become poor, my eyesight is bad. I realize that I will not have time to put my grandson on his feet. My time is up. And it hurts my heart. They'll put the boy in an orphanage. What's it like in the state penitentiary? Nothing good. I feel sorry for him. Tomorrow I'll ask Mike, my neighbor, to take the bus into town to see a doctor. He's so poor he's coughing. Emily shook her head and swiped at her running tears. This poor grandmother's story had touched her to the core, and she felt so sorry for the boy. She volunteered to help. You don't have to ask anyone. Mike will fix the tire on my car tomorrow, and I'll drive you and your grandson myself. I work at the clinic. I know all the doctors. I'll take him to the best pediatrician, and I'm sure they'll help him there. I'll cancel the business trip. If that's the case, human life is more important. This lady, the old woman, even cried. She wiped her tears with the edge of her handkerchief and thanked. Thank you, my dear. You can't find such compassionate people nowadays. I'll pray for you. Look how beautiful my Emily was. She was like her father, black-browed eyes like saucers. All the men in the village sighed when they looked at her. I didn't save my girl, and I miss her so much. Emily looked at the framed picture and gasped. There was indeed a picture of a young, very beautiful girl. She was radiant, her eyes shining with happiness. Hugging her was Jason, Emily's husband. There was no way there could be a mistake. Eventually, the woman asked dumbfounded, "Who's that next to your daughter in the picture?" Susan replied sharply, "So it's that asshole. The married coward, Jack's father, wanted to cut him out of the picture, but then I didn't. I figured if I died, maybe my granddaughter would want to find my father. You never know, it could happen." Emily felt sick to her stomach. She apologized and went outside, putting her face in the pouring rain and wiping the tears from her cheeks. She couldn't believe it all. So Jack was Jason's son. Jason had been cheating on her for a long time. The rumors were true. People weren't lying, and she was a fool not to believe it. Poor little guy, what a terrible fate he's going to meet. Grandma's very old. There's no one else. The scoundrel father doesn't need him. Only an orphanage will do. No way. The decision came instantly, like a flash of lightning. Emily walked back into the house and sat down next to her grandmother, took her dry, wrinkled hand, which looked like a chicken's foot, in her own and began to speak. "Susan, what I'm about to tell you is hard to believe, and yet that scoundrel in the picture is not only your late daughter's fiancé, but also my husband. It's hard for me to realize it myself, but it's true. We've been together for years. I can't believe that Jason could do such a despicable thing, cheating on me and ruining your daughter. I guess it was fate that brought me to your house. You see, Jack is not a stranger to me. He's my husband's son, and I won't abandon him. I won't leave him in the lurch. I'm going to help the boy get better, and I want to adopt him. Would you mind? I have a job in my own apartment. My father owns a bank. The child won't need anything." The elderly woman looked at her dumbfounded, as if she were crazy. "How can it be? Oh my goodness. Forgive me and my daughter. Do you really want to adopt your mistress's son? I don't believe it. What about your husband? If he abandoned my daughter when she was pregnant, he didn't want to be involved with the child. I don't think he'll accept Jack now. I don't think he'll accept Jack now." Cecily replied eagerly, "It doesn't matter. I've made up my mind. I'll divorce my husband and raise Jack myself. I'll raise him like a son. I'll love him, and I won't leave you. I've been dreaming of a baby for years. I can't give birth on my own. And now fate is giving me this chance to be Jack's mama. You think about it, and now let's go to bed. I'm so tired." The next day, Mike helped fix the tire. Emily picked up Jack and Grandma Susan and took them to the clinic. The baby was lethargic, refused to eat, and napped the whole time. He went straight into Emily's arms as if he had known her for a long time. She gazed at the boy. How much did he look like Jason? The same look and sharp nose, the same blonde hair, and the same shaped ears. She couldn't stand it any longer, and while Susan gathered her papers and things, she called her husband. The connection was a little better in the village. Jason had taken a vacation after his wife's departure and was having fun with another young woman, tumbling in bed with her and whispering sweet nothings in her ear, kissing her tender neck. Then the phone rang. It was his wife. Jason gently pulled his mistress away from him and reluctantly picked up the phone. What Emily informed him shocked him. "Good morning, sweetheart. I had a change of plans. A business trip canceled. It's long to explain, but I'm taking a little baby and his grandmother into town for treatment. He's so cute. He's all alone. His mom died in childbirth. His father abandoned him before he was born. And his grandmother is 80 years old. She can't even lift him. So I was thinking, why don't we adopt him? Give Jack a happy childhood. I feel so sorry for him." Jason immediately jumped up as if he'd been splashed with cold water. Lamance was gone. And he yelled in a low voice, "Emily, are you out of your mind? Are you all right in the head? I'm totally against it, and I'm not going to raise someone else's child. Don't you dare do that? Or don't we have a family anymore?" Listen, the woman deliberately didn't tell him the whole truth. She wanted to hear what he had to say, and was convinced that with this man she can no longer be associated with anything. He didn't want his own children or anyone else's. Emily exhaled and replied stiffly, "Whatever. No family means no family. I'm not changing my mind. I'll take the baby to the hospital and come home. We'll talk." Jason threw the phone to the floor in frustration and yelled at his mistress, "What are you doing lying around? Come on, get dressed and get out of here. I don't have time for you right now. How much you all bore me, what you women in your head and the devil will not understand." The offended girl left, giving her lover the last words she'd ever heard. But Jason didn't care. He was already dialing the number of the handyman from the ad. "Hello, I need the locks changed right away. Write down the address. I'll pay twice as much in cash." He decided there was no way he was letting Emily into his apartment with another man's child. He was so angry, he decided to get a divorce and sue. "Wait a minute, you naive fool. You don't know who you're messing with yet. Look at what the crazy one has come up with. To bring some childish kid here, and even with an old woman, they think she's going to make it that easy. I've been working for her daddy for nothing all these years. The money's almost in my hands. My father-in-law's 1 foot in the grave, so he can't hurt me. You'll be begging, Emily." Emily decided not to say anything to Susan about the unpleasant conversation. The boy would have to be identified for treatment first, so they drove to the clinic. As it turned out, just in time, Jack had advanced bronchitis. A little more and it would have been pneumonia. The boy was hospitalized and his grandmother stayed with him. Emily bought them everything they needed, hugged Jack and the old lady. "Everything is going to be okay. There are very professional doctors here. They will cure you for sure. And you'll have a little rest from the hard housework. You'll come to your senses. I'll come back tomorrow. Now I need to go home and have a serious talk with my husband." "I'm sorry, Emily. Jack and I are the reason your family is falling apart, but I had nothing to do with it. You know that." Emily sighed heavily and replied, "You really had nothing to do with it. It's not your fault my husband is such a jerk. Turns out I lived with a lying, selfish man for so many years and didn't want to notice anything. It's gonna be okay. I'm there for you now and I won't leave you." She kissed the boy gently on the cheek and went to her house. She wanted to shower and change and deal with Jason, to have a straight talk. But to her surprise, the key wouldn't go in the keyhole. She looked closely and realized her husband had changed the locks. Licensed, the woman rushed to call him on his cell phone, but he deliberately did not pick up. There was only one way out, the intercom. Emily went out of the entrance, dialed the code of the apartment. Surprisingly, her husband answered, "I know it's you, Emily. Don't try to break down the door. I won't let you in with someone else's baby. Come to your senses. Take the boy home to the village and we'll forget this whole thing like a bad dream. I'll never accept him. Remember and think hard. Is a stranger child worth all the trouble that awaits you." You don't know. He was indignant and shouted, "You don't know everything. This is your own son. You had a relationship with Laura Smith, didn't you? Well, you left her pregnant. She died in childbirth. And now his grandmother is raising him on her own. Jack is your son. Are you such a despicable person that you won't change your mind?" Jason snickered. It was all true. about Laura and her pregnancy. What he didn't know was that she was no longer alive, and he didn't need that son, but the man thought about it. He still felt guilty. "Look, Emily, I'm opening the door. Let's talk calmly. It was a fling. That girl meant nothing in my life, and I didn't ask her to have the baby. I gave her the money to get an abortion, so I don't want anything to do with that baby. It doesn't change anything, you know. Why do you want it? Every woman in your position would hate that kid. I mean, he's from a mistress, basically. Why do you want to take on this burden? Are you bored with your life? So your father is dying. Don't be silly, take the boy back and come back. And everything will be like it was before." What kind of scoundrel? Ensign screamed. "What kind of scoundrel are you, Jason? It's you I hate, not that poor boy and his dead mother. Get out of my apartment, or I'll have the police come and break the door down. We're getting a divorce, and it's final. I'll give you 24 hours to be out of here tomorrow." God, what kind of man have I been living with? Not an ounce of remorse, not an ounce of pity. It just doesn't make sense. She ran to the car. She had no strength at all. She wanted to howl and scream, how blind she had been, how she had not noticed anything. What kind of gullible fool had she been? Emily wiped away her tears, took a drink of water and exhaled. She whispered, "I need to pull myself together and go see my father. Only he can understand me like no one else." Letson, the woman, drove to the hospital. Her mind was a complete mess. Her thoughts were confused as to how to go on living. Her whole world had collapsed, and she was treading on the ruins. She didn't know how to start a new life without Jason. The doctor shocked Emily when he told her that her father had gotten worse. He had heart and kidney problems. He'd been moved to the intensive care unit. The woman gasped and rushed in. She didn't want to be let in, but she knew how to be persuasive when she had. She entered the room. Her father was so helpless, tubes sticking out, sensors buzzing. His eyes were closed. The woman sat down next to him, stroked his head, his cheek, and whispered, "Daddy, honey, what are you doing? How can it be? I thought when I left, you were a little better. It's gonna be okay. You're gonna be okay. You're gonna be okay. I love you so much. Fight, please don't give up." The man opened his eyes, saw his daughter, and smiled weakly. He squeezed out in a hoarse voice, "I've waited. I've been waiting for you, my daughter. I was afraid to die and not say the most important thing. I love you too, sweetheart. I guess it's my time to go. Will I see my daughter soon? She's waiting for me." "I know it. You be strong. You and Jason will get through this together, I'm sure. Just don't take too long with the grandkids. It's a shame. I'll probably never see them again." Emily was delirious. "No, Daddy, you don't know anything. I'm divorcing my husband, and I want to adopt the baby. This is his son, which he, like the last scoundrel, abandoned. He's all alone and no one wants him. I never realized that Jason was such a two-faced and horrible person, that he was capable of lying like that, of cheating on me. I'm in so much pain, Daddy. I need you. I have faith that you will get better. I can't lose you." So that's it. Well, Jason has certainly brought a surprise. I'll get a notary here tomorrow, and Ryder will leaving everything to you alone. And as for the baby, that's up to you. Listen to your heart. I'm sure you'll do the right thing. Nothing, my daughter. We'll fight again if it's like this. Don't get upset. Go home, get some rest. And I'll sleep too. I'm so sleepy all the time. Emily left the hospital with the hope that Daddy would be all right now. He would be there for her as always, and everything would work out. But her hopes were not to be realized. In the morning, she got a call from the hospital and was told that her father had passed away during this terrible, irreplaceable grief literally nailed the woman, pushing everything else to the background. She organized the funeral and the wake as if in a dream, listening to the condolences. She kept looking for Jason, but her hubby hadn't shown up for his father-in-law's funeral, even though she'd told him about it. They'd lived together for so many years, and her husband owed his career to his father. Emily didn't forget to visit Susan and Jack in the hospital, and after they were discharged, she moved them to her father's mansion, persuaded them to stay a little longer. She had too much on her plate at once to make any decisions. Her head was completely out of whack, like a cotton ball. It took Emily almost a month to recover. Her grandmother comforted her as best she could, and Jack kept her busy. The woman had grown very attached to the baby. It was the worries about him did not let her lose heart, distracted her from bad thoughts. Finally, a little recovered from grief, Emily decided that it's time to act, divorce her husband and file documents for the adoption of Jack. There was no problem with the latter. In the column father and the boy was a dash. The mother had died and the grandmother was too old to be a guardian. Emily had her own place and a job. She was quickly approved for adoption. But with the divorce there were difficulties. It turns out that the enterprising hubby did not waste time and completely emptied the bank, pumped all the money into his accounts abroad. Yes, and from their joint account money also vaporized without a trace. In fact, after a difficult divorce, Emily was left with only a mansion, an apartment, and her modest business, the only source of income. Everything else shamelessly appropriated Jason. The other day at the lawyer, after the death of his father, Emily was unbearably painful to be in his house. Literally everything reminded her of her loved one, and she sobbed, unable to cope with herself, and in the apartment was lived so many years with her husband. The memories were not pleasant either. The woman was thrashing about, her soul had no rest. And then Susan's wise grandmother suggested, "Emily, listen to the old woman. I see how you, poor thing, are suffering. You've only got eyes left on your face, and I'll never live in the city. My soul is not in place. I've got chickens, my goat, my dog Rex. I asked Mike to look after it. He'll say, but my heart wants to go home. Why don't we go back to the village? My grandson and I have a small house, but it's good, so we can all fit in. You see, we have a forest, nature, berries, and mushrooms in summer. Nature itself will heal your soul. You'll live there for a while, and then you'll decide what you want to do next. And Jack likes to run around the yard and chase chickens. It's free, it's nice." Emily clutched at this offer as a lifeline and decided to move. At first, everyone thumbed their nose at her, especially at her clinic. It should be divorced from her husband, a banker, leave a luxury mansion, and move to live in the middle of nowhere, and even adopt a non-native child. But the woman did not pay attention to these gossip. Her tormented soul demanded peace and change. She switched to a remote job. Now she was in charge of document management in the clinic. After all, from the village every day cannot travel. And Jack needed supervision. The boy was quick nimble. You just had to keep up with him. At first, Emily found village life unbearably difficult. When she saw the toilet in the yard, in general, almost fainted. The woman had no idea they still existed, or an old wash basin with a valve in the form of a rod. Don't forget to take the bucket out. While she was mastering the stove, all three of them nearly burned themselves to death. Turns out there's a trick to it too. Susan was patient and taught Emily everything as if she were Jack's age. Mike often visited them and laughed. He could not believe that a city girl could survive in the village. He thought she'd run away in a month. In fact, he liked Emily very much even then, on the deserted road at night. He fell in love with her immediately. He realized they were too different. He was a simple country tractor driver, and she was the daughter of a bank owner. And there was an age difference. The guy was 5 years younger than Emily, so he wasn't in a hurry to confess. He tried to help her, took her to the woods, to the river. With Jack, he fiddled, so slowly they became close. They talked a lot, and the woman saw Mike as more than just a guy. Turns out he had a steel rod inside of him. He was passionate about his home village and had a big fight with local farmer Mark Fielding. He tried every way he could to persuade his fellow villagers to sell their land for development. He described the future cottages, the benefits of civilization, a lot of tourists, and promised that the villagers will be offered comfortable apartments. That's good. There are a lot of old people in the village. It will be easier for them to live in an apartment. Why are you against it? Mike waved his hands eagerly. How can you not understand? This is protected land. Nature is untouched, and now it's worth digging everything up, pouring asphalt over it. And what will your stone jungle be to our grass? That's what people come here for. Many say the air here is even therapeutic. You can't spoil it. That's the only reason the old people are alive, because they work on their own land. Rip them up by the roots, and they wouldn't survive in a new place, would they? Fielding's a tricky one. He wants to cheat the old people, buy up the land for nothing, and then sell it for 3 times the price. And he doesn't care about the people, and I intend to fight to the end. I'm going to make such a fuss. I'll get the press involved. You don't know anyone like that in town. I'm sure Fielding will get scared and change his mind. Emily thought about the boy's words and replied, "You're right. I came here sick myself, unable to recover from my husband's betrayal and divorce. My father's death had completely destroyed me. And here I didn't notice how I felt a little better. Gone were the black thoughts. No more longing. I feel alive again. I'll help you." We called a journalist. He's a fan of sensationalism and digging up other people's laundry. Let's get Fielding some publicity. Emily and Mike did a great job. The film crew seriously frightened the farmer with their report, and he promised that he would stop buying up land and campaigning in exchange for not airing the video. Mike was pleased. They struck a deal and parted ways. But a week later, the tractor driver disappeared without a trace. He didn't show up for work, and he wasn't home. Grandma Susan and Emily were the first to sound the alarm. The whole village searched for Mike, but it was as if he'd vanished into thin air. They picked the lock on his house and everything was there, even the soup on the stove. So the boy wasn't going anywhere. Emily's heart was troubled. She'd grown so attached to the guy. She saw the way he looked at her. She realized that the poor guy was in love with her, but she was afraid to open up and admit to herself that she liked him too. And only now, when Mike was gone, she realized how much she missed him, how worried and how much she missed him. His little boy also kept asking when Uncle Mike was coming, and his grandmother cried in silence, suspecting something wrong. But a couple of weeks later, a bad rumor spread through the village. "Emily, Susan, have you heard what's happened? There's a ghost in our village. You can see the smoke billowing. It's pitch black. That's the ghost avenging Fielding for Mike's death. He's ruining his machinery. It's the second combine on fire. Oh my God, what's going on?" Grandma Susan crossed herself and spat 3 times over her left shoulder to ward off the evil force. She shook her head and wailed, "Is there a ghost from the marshes again? Holy, holy. 30 years ago, remember, Sarah, one after another mushroomers drowned in the swamp, and then nothing, quiet. And here he is again. There's no one else, I'm telling you." For a long time, the neighbors wondered who it could be. But Emily had her own opinion, but she decided not to voice it yet. She didn't believe in any ghost, of course, but there was a faint ray of hope in her soul. What if it was Mike's revenge? Maybe he's alive, maybe hiding in the woods. But he couldn't just disappear like that. She'd hinted more than once that she wanted a family, and Jack loved her. "We have to find him, but I don't know where to go. As my late father used to say, the heart will tell you." Just in case, Emily first went with her suspicions to the gamekeeper, Stephanie. "I may see," she didn't try to be coy. She told it like it is and begged, "Help me find Mike. I don't believe that he could leave like this or disappear in the swamp. It's all Fielding's fault, I'm sure of it. I wanted to go into the woods myself, but I'm afraid I'll never find the body." The gamekeeper shook his head. "You mean Mike? He couldn't have left. He loved our village with all his soul. Let's go to a place. I have a remote hut. I sleep there sometimes when I feed the moose. Not many people know, but you can live there for a while. There's matches, breadcrumbs, canned goods, and a spring nearby. If Mike's alive, that's the only place he can be. Otherwise, he'd have been hunted down by the beasts long ago." The huntsman took his rifle, backpack, and supplies, and they set off. Emily was lagging behind, her legs buzzing, the branches scratching her hands. But she didn't complain, trying to keep up with the frowning old Stepanik. She had a goal to find Mike. Listened when the gamekeeper was right. The boy was holed up in his hut. Emily looked at the poor guy in a gax. The whole body was covered with abrasions, bruises, and hematomas. His leg was badly swollen, and he was thin, not looking like himself. Stephanie, how did you guess that I'm alive, that I live in the forest? And you, Emily? I certainly did not expect to see. Mind you, I'm not going back to the village until I've had my revenge on Fielding. It wasn't me. It was Emily who begged me to look for you. She guessed it was you who was messing up the farmer's machinery. You made a show of it. Of course. The locals are afraid to go out at night now. They think it's the lion from the swamp. It's a disaster. Don't be silly, Mike. Let's go home. You've played outlaw enough. You'll get yourself a jail sentence. Sooner or later, the secret's going to come out. You'll have to answer for everything. Light be and tread anger. Do you know, Stephanie, that this scoundrel and his accomplices beat me half to death and buried me alive in the forest? He thought I was dead. I don't know how I survived and got out of the pit. I come back, so what? He's not going to leave me alone. I mean, come on. He's going to torture Emily. I mean, she helped me. She invited those reporters. No, I'm going to take revenge on him as long as I live. You have to fight for your land. Emily couldn't take it anymore and started to talk to the guy. Mike, come on. This is not the way. How long will you last here? Your leg's all messed up. What if it gets infected? You'll die here. Who cares? We should go to police. Have him call the police. Call the press again. Didn't Fielding try to kill you? That's no joke. We need to let them sort this out. I mean, he's not the guy. He's just the middleman. We need to find out who's behind this. Let's go home, please. You need to go to the hospital. The boy shook his head negatively, and that's when Emily got angry and shouted. Oh, that's right. Let's go, Stephanie. Let him sit here fooling around. I cried my eyes out. I couldn't find a place. I looked for him around the village for 24 hours. And he don't give a damn about me and Jack. So we'll leave. And he said he wanted a family. Stephanie only grinned. Mike jumped up on one foot, grabbed Emily's hands, and looked at her so intently. Were you really worried about me? Do you love me a little bit? Emily, I've been pining for you for a long time, but I've been afraid to tell you how much I love you. I'd go to the end of the world with you. And he shone with happiness. It took a long time to get back. We arrived almost after dark. As soon as there was a connection, Emily immediately called the police and called the emergency team. The boy was rushed to the hospital. He needed treatment already in the hospital, removed the beatings, and the investigator recorded his testimony, and Emily confirmed that Fielding shouted in front of everyone that he'd burned the two of them to death. The investigation was in full swing. The press and television helped publicize it, and soon something interesting came to light. Emily was shocked to learn that the villain was her ex-husband. He was badly shaken up, and it turned out that he had illegally wanted to purchase these conservation lands and launder the money. There weren't really any apartments for the villagers. He was just going to scam people. Jason found himself under investigation. He was facing a lot of jail time, and his new business failed miserably, and Jason lost everything. And Fielding got a beating and an attempt on a man's life. The villagers hated the greedy farmer. He was always underpaid and had to work from morning till night, and he was literally driven out of the village. Fielding had to move out of the village. He'd been making a lot of money lately. Mike was soon released from the hospital and returned to the village. He never left Emily's side for a second, and she spit on all the conventions and gossip, stopped hiding her feelings for the guy. The guy's intentions were very serious, and the couple soon signed at the village hall. And Jack Mike adopted, gave him his last name and patronymic. Windman sold in the city of the mansion of his father, and the proceeds helped Mike to realize his dream. The guy has long told Emily that he dreams of opening a bakery in the village. After all, people have a lot of grain, and bread is taken to the store irregularly, and so it will be a holiday for people. Always fresh bread and a profit for himself. The fact that Mike's hands are golden, Emily also noted. When they began to live in his house, everything was made by his hands with love and conscience. Therefore, she did not even doubt that Mike will succeed and actively undertook to help him with the purchase of equipment. She was good at that. It took them almost a year to build and start production. It was necessary to calculate everything down to the last detail, to collect a lot of documents, to pass hundreds of instances. And then, finally, the business began to pay off. Mike didn't jack up the price. Therefore, from early morning now, the line for bread lined up at his bakery. It was delicious and crispy. Emily marveled at Mikey's zeal. He seemed to be able to work around the clock. He was so absorbed in his favorite pastime. She had time to help him and still ran the clinic. He even bought a whole arsenal of medical supplies and equipment for their paramedic station at a bargain price. The villagers no longer gossiped, and their age difference was very much respected. The couple were called their lovebirds and were grateful that they put both their souls and money into the development of their native village. Emily never regretted listening to Grandma Susan and taking the risk of moving. Now she would never agree to live in a stuffy city again. The woman loved this place with all her soul. Here you think differently and breathe easier. Everything is imbued with goodness. The land itself generously shares with everyone who loves and wants to work. Now Emily admired the picturesque landscape, green meadows, a river, murmuring water and smelling herbs. Where would you find such a thing in the city? And how cozy and warm it was on winter evenings to dine together in the kitchen. Grandma Susan seemed even younger and no longer bent to the ground. She was now calm for her grandson because he had good loving parents. The boy was now in first grade. Time flies fast. The old woman liked to warm herself by the stove, knitting long scarves and socks, smiling and muttering something under her nose. Jack had long ago called Emily Mom and Mike Dad. He decided that, though his parents wouldn't lie to him about him being their own son, they told it like it was from the beginning. After all, in the village, you can't hide the truth in a bag. The boy loved his mother very much. He obeyed her in everything. He helped his father in everything. But he knew where his other mother, who gave birth to him, was buried in the cemetery. Together with his parents, he took care of her grave. One day an event happened. Emily was kneading dough. Jack and his grandmother were feeding the chickens. Suddenly, there was a loud knock on the wicket. Emily stepped out onto the threshold and gasped. Jason was standing there, unrecognizable. He put on a lot of weight. He looked heavy and ungroomed. He had bags under his eyes. She exclaimed, "Jason, why are you here? How did you even know where I live?" The man grinned evilly. "Well, how could you not know? That Mark Fielding thing ruined my whole life. I did time and lost everything because of it. Now I'm out, and I want to see my own son. Jack, come here. I'm here for you. I'm your daddy." The boy was frightened and began to cry. "Daddy, there's some evil uncle coming, saying he's going to take me away and that he's my daddy." Mike clenched his fists. "Jack, don't cry, son, and don't be afraid of anything. Just sit here. I'll be right there." Emily tried to have a normal conversation with her ex-husband. "Jason, wake up. What do you need Jack for? You gave up on him before he was even born. Get out of here. Don't scare the baby. Don't ruin the boy's life." But Jason didn't stop, shouting louder and louder. "This is my son and I have a right to see him, and I will take him. You'll see." I see you looked at Emily's belly bulging out from under the sundress and sneers. "I see you haven't been wasting your time. You've been hitting on the young. So this simple country boy wanted you too. Isn't it funny in your old age? Why do you need someone else's baby? You'll have your own brood soon. And I have no one but you. You didn't hurry to bear me children. That's why you're having a baby." Emily felt so hurt. She wanted to tell the bastard everything. And then Mike pushed her back and whispered, "Sweetheart, take Jack and go inside. Go on, I'll make this quick." "Go on, honey. You can't be nervous." Emily obeyed her husband and took the child away. But she was nervous and stood in the hay, listening to what was going on outside the gate. Blake picked Jason up by the scruff of his neck, gave him a good shake, and shouted, "Listen to me carefully. Forget this place once and for all. This is my family, my beloved wife, and my son by all documents. And you, Jason, are a nobody. So get out of here, or I'll beat you so bad you'll be in the emergency room for a week. And remember, you're an asshole for losing a woman like Emily. And I love her more than my life, and I wouldn't let anyone hurt her. And Jack is my son. End of story. Get the hell out of here. Or do you need a kick to speed things up? Jason staggered away, humiliated and beaten. Anger choked him. No one needed him now. He'd ruined everything. He'd once had everything he could ever want. Now he was a lonely and destitute ex-convict. She adopted my own son out of spite to hurt me, and the boy is scared of his own father. Mike thinks he's his daddy. I wish they'd all go to hell. It was my late father-in-law who cursed me before he died, I know. After he died, everything went wrong. The man bought 2 bottles of vodka at the store and walked to the station. He drank straight from his throat without a snack. Drunkenly, he cried and took the wrong path straight into the forest. Nobody ever saw him again. The locals said that he disappeared in the swamps. They said the woodsman had dragged him away. Unfortunately, Jason never realized that it was all his own fault. After all, sooner or later you have to pay for all your deeds. That's life. Emily's pregnancy was difficult. The doctors said she was at a critical age, but she didn't give up. She struggled with severe toxicosis. Mike took care, forbade heavy lifting, kept her safe. Susan cooked herbal concoctions, gave special, and in due time Emily gave birth to a daughter. Olivia, happy Mike took her from the maternity hospital with a huge bouquet of flowers and balloons. The women on the ward waved and were jealous. How could they? That's lucky, such a young, handsome, working so loves her. In the village, Emily was waiting for another surprise. In the yard, there was already a tent and a long table with benches. All the villagers had gathered there. There were all kinds of treats on the table. They congratulated Emily and the baby, wishing her good health. Susan even raised a glass and made it. Emily, darling, if you only knew how grateful I am that your car broke down near our village, and that Mike brought you to my house. You're like a guardian angel. You flapped your wing and sheltered me and my grandson. I pray for your health every night and ask God for nothing but happiness for you. Deserve it, my dear. I feel so good with you. It's like we're blood relatives. You and Mike be good friends. Love my Jack. Raise my granddaughter. Everyone drank and cried. Emily hugged the old lady. She really was like her own grandmother. It was amazing. Mike decided to make a toast to, well, let's drink to Olivia Smith, the new resident of our village and my daughter. Emily, my darling, thank you for giving me a princess, my tiny one. Jack and I will keep her safe and spoil her. Thank all you kind people. I also want to say thank you for always helping me with a kind word and advice. We are all one big friendly family here. That's what the village is all about. So to Olivia. Everyone cheered and drank, thanking and socializing. Then Grandpa Sam brought out the accordion and the women started singing. Some of them even danced. Emily rocked her baby, admired the light clouds, and thought how good it felt. Perhaps all my sorrows and troubles had to be endured to find such simple human happiness. Who would have told me before that I, the daughter of a bank director, would suddenly love the village? Not only that, I'd want to live here forever. I don't care if a clinic calls me a village queen and twirls their fingers around my head. It doesn't matter what age difference Mike and I have. That's what my late daddy used to say about listening to your heart. And it's so easy for him right now, which means I did the right thing. Emily didn't say a word. It's free. She heard a woman's voice bring her back to reality. Yes, the girl replied absent-mindedly and set her bag on the floor. An older woman sat next to her, her hands folded in her lap. She sighed sadly as the train started and took them forward through the gray spring landscapes of fields and forest. The passengers got to talking on the way, and after entering the city, Emily helped an elderly woman carry her heavy bags to the bus stop. She had come from the village to visit relatives, but no one had met her. Emily looked sadly at the departing bus. She felt sorry for the lonely old woman, though she was no less lonely herself. At least she had a place to go. And the girl in this city, no one would give her a corner for nothing. However, such travels through the cities of the region, one could say, had already become a habit during the last months when she was traveling in search of income and housing. She was hired to work at markets selling vegetables and fruit, as a dishwasher, at least for the time of sick leave and short vacations, as a janitor. And if she was lucky, a miner. She didn't stay anywhere for long, and she was glad of any opportunity to get some money to pay for room and board. Even that seemed a good life compared to what she'd had before. Still in her nightmares, she saw the endless field, the searing sun that made dark spots appear before her eyes, and her aunt's, "Who else would want you but me? Yeah, anyone would have kicked you out on the street a long time ago," her squeaky voice echoed in my head. "Next stop," announced the conductor, and the childhood memories dissipated. She went in search of work at the warehouses, car washes, and gas stations on the outskirts of town. Among them were diners where she could also try her luck. My shoes were soaked, my bag was weighing down on my shoulders, but there was nowhere to go. She had to find something for the day, otherwise she would be homeless tomorrow. Mostly they refused politely and quietly. But at one of the car washes, the receptionist, for some reason, took her for a beggar and shouted in front of the other employees, "Get out of here. It's fashionable to walk around. I will not give you any work. You'll steal something else or worse." The driver, who had come to pay, looked at Emily, and she felt very uncomfortable. He was holding a cup of coffee in a paper bag with a brownie he'd just bought at the local buffet. The girl hadn't eaten anything since this morning. "Sorry," she hurriedly said, and quickly walked outside. It felt like she had just been doused in slop. How she hated her poverty at this moment. And she was not asking for alms, but wanted to earn an honest living. "Can I give you a ride?" came a man's voice from somewhere. "What?" Emily was confused. "And if you can, that would be great. Get it." It was the same man she'd run into at the car wash. A few minutes ago, driving by, he had stopped and looked out the open window. Once inside the car, Emily felt uncomfortable for the second time. The interior was clean, modern, and smelled very pleasantly of fragrance and expensive men's perfume. The girl even looked shyly at the driver and pondered to herself why he had stopped. Pity, an unpleasant thought flashed through her head. "Where do you want to go? To the nearest hostel of some kind, the cheapest one?" the man asked. The man turned on the navigator and used it to find the right address. Emily was angry at herself for having bypassed so few organizations and was afraid that tomorrow she would suffer the same fate. "Are you looking for a job?" the new acquaintance asked, either noticing the passenger's sad face or just out of politeness. "Yes," she replied faintly. "And what do you do for a living?" he asked, pulling up outside a gray, unassuming building labeled hostel. "Clerk, dishwasher, basically, whatever they'll take." "Thank you very much." She was about to leave, but the man suddenly perked up. "Do you have a medical book?" "Yes, my name is Jason." He held out his hand. "And I'm Emily," she replied, a little surprised. "Emily, if you're looking for a job, why don't you go as a dishwasher at a restaurant? I have an employee who left unexpectedly due to illness, and the season is about to start. And there's a lot to do. Looking for someone new is always a problem." "Oh wow," Emily was completely confused. "Interesting. Write down my number. Come back tomorrow for an interview." "I don't have a phone. I'll write it down on a piece of paper." Jason dictated the address and left. Emily paid for a place in the hostel for the night, showered, and snacked on the bun she'd kept in her bag all day to eat when she got unbearably hungry. Finally, she crawled under the covers. Luckily, the room was barely occupied, and the two roommates were lying quietly in their beds, staring into their phones. And why would he do that? Emily asked herself, stroking her stomach. Her thoughts darted from one extreme to the other. At first, the girl was sure the man was a con artist, tricking naive fools into doing something illegal. Why? I only told him about the phone. Now he'll think that no one will even look for me in case of anything, she chastised herself. Then she suddenly imagined a beautiful, clean restaurant where the food smelled warm and delicious. She wanted to go there and eat to her heart's content with that pleasant feeling. The image of the casual acquaintance changed dramatically. Now he seemed like a kind and helpful person. Maybe he really needs a dishwasher urgently. He felt sorry for me and found out that I was looking for just such a job. So he offered it to me. What's the big deal? It's worth a shot. After all, washing dishes in a restaurant is still better than selling at the market. But think about it, she continued her inner dialogue as she fell asleep. She was determined that tomorrow she would go to the address and try to get a job. The morning was rainy and overcast. Her shoulders and legs were aching unpleasantly after yesterday's adventures. Emily, hello. Jason greeted her as she entered his office. Come on in, have a seat. Hello. Emily replied, once again feeling awkward. Her companion was sitting in his chair with his legs apart, the top buttons of his white shirt undone, and she noted to herself that he was quite handsome. Ready to get started in the next few days. I have a lot of guests in my kitchen right now. See, the thing is, I'm pregnant. There was a momentary pause, but it seemed to Emily that Jason had been silent for too long, and she was about to get up and leave. He didn't seem to be thinking of kicking her out, though. So let's do it this way, he said seriously. I'll give you a month's salary in advance so that you can rent a room for the first time. Don't refuse. I need a responsible employee, and without a permanent home, you're unlikely to do a good job. Emily didn't know how to respond. It was rare that anyone cared about her. So now it was hard to hold back tears, so much so that she was touched by her future boss's behavior. Jason did give her the money, and she rented a room near the restaurant. After getting to know the staff, Emily began her duties. Despite the constant bustle in the kitchen, she enjoyed washing dishes. She seemed to be the most cheerful in this new company. The cooks and waitresses often complained about their paychecks and lack of days off. But it's not like they were wandering around town with one bag looking for some part-time work for fear of being left on the street. Emily shrugged, smiling. The only person who disliked the new girl was the receptionist, Paul. This short, chubby man with a round face, which almost always lit up with a friendly smile, for some reason began to pick on her from the first minute. Appearances rest less often and work more. He remarked as he passed by as she took a seat in a chair. At that moment, his smile seemed venomous and mocking to her. And what did I ever do to him? Emily sighed, pacing home. Her whole body felt immensely tired. The only way to eat a good dinner was at work. So all she wanted to do on the way home was fall on her bed and sleep until morning. Oops, someone behind her nudged her. Where are you from, baby? There was a small white puppy sitting at the entrance to the supermarket with red spots on his sides and a thin tail that dangled cheerfully from side to side. Emily stroked the puppy's head and went inside. When she left the store, she bought a bag of dog food just in case. Her worst fears were realized. The little boy was sitting on the sidewalk nearby, as if waiting for someone. The street was empty, and behind her back, the vendor closed the door from the inside, obviously preparing to clean up and go home. But what am I going to do with you, silly? Emily asked sadly. As the puppy greedily devoured the food, she followed him all the way home, soaking wet from the rain. Skinny, panicked just like her, unwanted and alone like herself. She walked into the entryway and called the elevator. At the 10th floor, it descended, not lingering anywhere, and she was irresistibly drawn back. Finally, she couldn't stand it, waved her hand, and stepped outside. The puppy crouched against the wall, trying to hide from the rain. At the sight of Emily, he stood up and his tail wiggled hesitantly. Okay, let's go, just be quiet. She took him under her arm after all and headed into the apartment. Luckily, the hallway was empty and no one was cooking in the kitchen. She walked to her room, opened the door, left her shopping, and carried the puppy into the bathroom to hastily wash and feed him. Then she went back to her room and closed up. Surprisingly, he didn't run, barked, ate yesterday's porridge mixed with food, and fell sound asleep on the mat by the bed. Unable to think of what to do with him next, Emily washed her face and fell asleep. Over time, as the baby grew older and she accustomed him to taking morning and evening walks, Emily grew accustomed to her new life. More than once, she thought that the decision to have a dog in a communal apartment was the height of insanity. However, fate favored them. In the meantime, a noisy man who liked to scandalize moved out of the next room. So they were left with Emily, a quiet, inconspicuous student who came only to sleep, and an equally quiet woman whom they met occasionally in the kitchen or on the stairs. None of them had made any complaints about the puppy. So she settled in. What was really hard to do was to keep hiding the pregnancy from her coworkers. She didn't want to be pitied or ask unnecessary questions that she herself would have had trouble answering. But it was impossible to avoid the topic forever either. "Emily, confess, are you expecting a baby?" Dana, the blonde waitress, once asked, nodding toward her already rounded tummy. "Yes, I'm expecting," Emily replied simply. Wow. The girl's eyebrows crept upward in surprise. She looked at her coworker with big eyes, but then added with a smile, "I'm happy for you." That evening, when they had already left, Dana gathered everyone in the locker room and broke. Everyone, except the receptionist, treated the new girl well. So they didn't mind congratulating her, and in a couple of days, a folding crib was purchased in the closet, and in the refrigerator food for a feast was saved. There was nothing to do. "Congratulate her on being pregnant," Jason said arrogantly, in response to the offer to join the group. Without him, however, there were plenty of people willing to join. Everyone from the cooks and waiters to the janitor and the janitorial staff joined in the festivity. Emily was moved to tears. She had not expected such a warm attitude on the part of total strangers and new people. And their gift came just in time, especially since they delivered and assembled it themselves. Now in the corner of Emily's room stood a pretty wooden crib with a blue mattress and pillows, and above it rock stars made of soft felt. And after the feast, for the first time in years, she was able to speak out and put into words all her pain, fears, and hopes. "I'm sorry if I'm minding my own business," Dana began when they were left alone to clean up the table. It was immediately clear what she wanted to ask: who's the father of the baby? After a moment's silence, Emily decided to speak. Her colleague was not the kind of person who spread gossip and asked only for the sake of idle curiosity. But still, telling about her personal life was very hard. "You don't have to tell me if you want to," Dana remarked, sensing the awkward pause. "He came to visit us in the village, to our relatives, businesslike, so handsome, in a car. We ran into him one day outside the store. We got to talking. He walked me almost home. Where in the middle of nowhere did you find such a beautiful girl?" I asked, and I blossomed. I thought I was in love. I thought I was, but I didn't. I wasn't actually in love. Only he wasn't what I thought he was. But that's something you don't realize right away. "So how did you end up here?" Dana asked. "He snuck me out and took me to the city," said Emily. "Really?" But seeing the horror in Dana's eyes, she smiled, like snatched me, sedated me with sleeping pills, and drove me away in a car. "No, I went on my own, and even happily at the time. I lived with my aunt. She worked on her relative's farm as a child. When her aunt found out that Emily had been sneaking out on dates, she pressed her, rebuked her, saying she was ungrateful and should pray to her for sheltering an orphan after her parents died. Dana blurted out in her heart. Emily cried but agreed with her. She was forced to work longer hours than usual, forced to spend her evenings in the vegetable garden, as if her hopes were dashed for something good. Cut off. He had to leave that day, and she shed so many tears that she could have watered all the beds with them. But he didn't leave without you. No, she didn't notice anything from her grief. And he stood behind the fence and called to her softly. "You want to hurry?" he said. She nodded. Her heart was pounding like crazy, as if ready to jump out of her chest. How had her aunt not noticed? She still wondered, but he helped her over the fence, and the car was parked nearby. That's how she found herself in a house dress and dirty slippers in the city. What happened next? Dana asked impatiently. He rented an apartment. I lived in it for a while, bought me some clothes, and showed me around the city. It went on like that for a month and a half until I found out he was married. There was a lump in my throat, but I didn't want to cry. Apparently, the pain from those events gradually faded into the past. He said we either live like this or we split up. It turns out that it was just a hobby for him, a way to take a break from his wife and children. That's how I ended up on the street. I couldn't go back to my aunt. She'd eat me by train. I started to survive on temporary earnings, traveling around the cities in search of housing and food. And then I got pregnant like a snowball. At first, I didn't want to believe it, but no, my belly's growing. I haven't even been to the hospital once. "How?" exclaimed Dana. "Make sure you go. You have to get attached and get checked out. And histories, of course. You're good for coming to us." Luck. She smiled. Days went by. It turned out that even David's constant taunts and displeasure were something to get used to. It was getting harder and harder to do the dishes, get to and from work, and walk the baby. But even here, she tried not to complain and to look at everything with a positive attitude. One day, on her way home from her morning shift, Emily hesitated at the exit and sat down at a vacant table to tie her shoelaces. Her thoughts of how hard it would be to manage even simple tasks were suddenly interrupted. Behind her, at a neighboring table, sat a man and a woman. Apparently, they had come in for lunch and were animatedly discussing things at work. I went out into the hallway today, and he's standing in the window watching. Susan told me later that he stands like that every day. Waiting for his mom to come get him, came a pleasant female voice. Doesn't he have any relatives at all? The interlocutor asked. No one, as far as I know, refused Nick. And there's nothing to treat him for. What don't they treat him? They help, of course, as much as they can, and the doctor comes every week from the children's polyclinic. But you understand there's always not enough money. She could not tear herself away from the chair. A conversation between two strangers and even overheard. But the story they were discussing touched her to the core. When the guests got up, she got up as well and headed after them. Just going for a walk. For interest's sake, she promised herself. The man and woman didn't notice the surveillance. They continued to discuss something until they reached a gray, unassuming building surrounded by a metal fence. A playground was visible away from the entrance. The windows on the second floor were decorated with paper flowers. What's the surprise? This was an orphanage. The small figure of a blonde-haired boy wearing a blue plaid shirt appeared in one of the windows. He looked around, as if searching for someone with his eyes. When he spotted Emily, he rose on his tiptoes and looked at her expectantly. A moment later, the curtain behind which he had been hiding moved, and a large woman in a brightly colored blouse and a carelessly curled lock of hair appeared behind him. She took him by the arm and with difficulty led him away. The boy tried to hold on and grab the windowsill. The child's strength was not enough to resist. His heart plummeted downward. The conversation of the visitors, the scene in the window, the shelter it all came together in one picture. She rang the intercom, told the guard she was here to see the director, and, finding the right office, knocked. Did I understand you correctly? You want to pay for Peter's treatment? The headmistress asked with restrained surprise. Yes, Emily replied confidently, on the way from the gate to this office. She had calculated that she would give away some of her modest savings. Well, good. We'll be glad to have you, said the superintendent. Tell me, are you a relative of his? No, I heard about his story by chance, said Emily. Can I see the boy? Peter stood at the window again, looking among the passers-by for someone to come and get him. He was too thin and small for a 5-year-old, and Emily wanted to hug him. Peter, you have visitors, his teacher told him calmly. The child turned around, eyes as blue as his shirt, and hesitantly peered out from behind the curtain. They were sitting in some office in the presence of the very woman from the orphanage who had dined at the restaurant that day. The boy folded his hands in his lap and fiddled with a small toy. Emily scolded herself for not carrying some cute little trinket in her bag, like a keychain or a notebook. What can I get you next time I'm here? She asked goodbye. It was obvious that Peter was glad that she had decided to come again, but he didn't dare to ask for anything, and only modestly lowered his head. Will you say something in my ear? Emily asked, leaning over, and he nodded in agreement. Hey, pencils, the boy whispered. Good, she said, and hugged him gently. That evening, counting the dollars she had saved, she took a deep breath, realizing how precious every dollar would soon be to her. Still, she didn't regret her decision to help Peter. She couldn't get past his story, especially after seeing it with her own eyes. The next day, Emily, completely immersed in her thoughts, did everything on automatic. Returning to the kitchen from the locker room, where she'd gone to get a sweater, she ran into a tall man who reminded her very much of Jason. At first, she'd mistaken him for her boss. I'm sorry, she said guiltily, smiling. That's all right, the stranger answered her. Do you work here? Yes, in the kitchen. My name is Emily. Nice to meet you. I'm Kevin. Do you know where my brother Jason and your brother are? I think he went somewhere. You better ask the manager, Emily suggested. He's in the lounge talking to the bartender. Kevin smiled sweetly, keeping his eyes on Emily, and went to look for David. The girl smiled back embarrassedly and then hurried into the kitchen. In a matter of weeks, The orphanage and its residents had become Emily's own. On weekends, she came to Peter's house, bringing fruit, toys, paints, felt tip pens, coloring books. Of course, all of this had to be shared with the other children. But in the moments when the two of them sat together in the meeting room, Peter became the sole owner of a whole wealth. Since their first meeting, the boy had grown cheerful and strong, and as before, he ran to the window where he now looked out for Emily. "I drew you a picture," he said one day, and handed her a sheet of paper. It showed a woman with long hair walking among the trees and flowers, holding the hand of a little boy in a blue shirt. In the corner was the inscription, "Emily from Peter." "Now, that's beautiful. Did you write the letters yourself?" Emily asked. "Yes," the boy answered proudly, fiddling with the design kit while Emily brushed away a tear. She'd never asked where he'd come from in the orphanage, whether he remembered his family, who he'd been waiting for looking out the window, but she wanted to know it very much. The girl went to the headmistress. "Oh, Emily, sighed the woman. "It would be all right if he were from some bad family." "What's wrong with his family?" Emily asked. "I didn't tell you that," she whispered. "He's the grandson of a local businessman. There's a restaurant not far from here. Have you seen it?" Emily nodded. "Well, they have these restaurants all over the city," continued the manageress. "And the boy here to us. Nay, how come?" Emily asked, dumbfounded. "I don't know," she said. "They say his eldest son and his wife divorced. She married a second time. Now he lives in luxury, and he forgot about the child. He sent gifts for a while, and then he disappeared. Peter remembers him. No, he was just a baby when he came to us. And if he's waiting for someone, we're all waiting." In the months she'd lived here, Emily had walked the entire neighborhood, so there was no doubt. There was only one restaurant in the neighborhood, and Peter was in her boss's family. The image of a wealthy, confident man of chic appearance, clearly in need of nothing, came to mind. How could he leave the child in the orphanage, forget about him, give him to the care of strangers? Her sense of injustice grew in her until it was impossible to contain it. "Dana, do you know where Timothy's father, our principal, is? Everyone talks about him with such respect," she asked as nonchalantly as possible, as if she were just curious. "I've only seen him once," Dana said. "A man like a man, short, gray-haired. He's kind of in charge of the main restaurant, and he's given his sons the branch." After finding the address of the place, Emily ran home after her shift to feed and take the baby outside. Then she drove downtown to meet Michael Alexander in person. He appeared to be a very personable and businesslike man, sitting in a leather chair behind a large, heavy desk. "What can I do for you?" he asked her courteously, looking at her carefully. "I don't know where to begin," Emily admitted and told him everything she knew, trying to be tactful and calm. Michael Alexander listened without interrupting. It was hard to tell from his face what he was thinking and how he felt about what he had heard. "So you're saying that I have a grandson?" Stretching his words after a pause, he said. "Yes," she answered confidently. "Well, good. Leave me your number. I want to know more about it. As soon as I know, I'll call you." And he called exactly 2 days later, saying that he did not know about his grandson, but now he wanted to participate in his fate. There was confusion and even sadness in his voice. "Did you really melt your grandfather's heart?" Jason asked, smiling, when Peter's story had become public. "I guess I did, didn't I?" Emily smiled back. "He wants to take him in, and he's asking me to babysit. I just don't know how I'm going to keep up with everything." "We'll leave you fewer shifts, and soon we'll send you on maternity leave," the boss said, and she thought he sounded tender in his voice and looked at her in a special way. "Emily, can I talk to you for a minute?" "Me?" Footsteps sounded behind her. It was Kyle. He was as surprised to see Peter as his father had been. But contrary to his anxious expectations, he didn't get angry or pull away. On the contrary, he also decided to take part in the boy's upbringing. "Emily, you're a very kind and bright person," the man said when they were alone. "Do not think that I left my wife and son. I really didn't know about him, but it's not for me to judge," he shrugged. They were nearing the end of their 5th month of pregnancy, but they were still strong enough to go about their daily business. Peter finally waited for his happiness and looked out the window. He was taken to his grandfather's house, given a whole room, and bought a sea of toys. In the mornings, he was taken to daycare by Michael Alexander's driver, and in the afternoons, Emily came over to study and play with him. The wife of the owner was about 20 years younger than him and was more engaged in her own life, so that she was almost not visible. The baby, unexpectedly for the owners, became the favorite of the whole apartment. Neighbors, and even the dog, who at first cold to the newcomer dog, with time became sociable with him. Freedom walked along the corridor and even sometimes stayed at someone's house for the night. Emily was glad. When it was time to give birth, she would have someone to leave him with. One warm day in August, when nothing seemed to be going wrong and work at the restaurant was going on as usual, the man Kyle had been talking to Sandy with suddenly changed his face. "But come by the manager's office when you're free," he said sternly as he looked into the kitchen. Everyone who was around at that moment looked at them in surprise. "I thought he was in love with you." "Oh, don't make up nonsense," Emily retorted, pretending it was no big deal, though she wondered how she could have earned that attitude. How had he asked? She'd walked into Jason's office after work, who'd left that day, leaving his older brother in his place instead of David, his deputy. "Why are you prying into someone else's life without figuring things out?" Kyle began his interrogation abruptly. "Is something wrong?" "I don't understand. That's what I don't understand. Why meddle in another family's affairs? I have to justify myself to my father for the umpteenth time. And it's all because of you, because you stick your nose where it doesn't belong." He'd never allowed himself to talk to her like that before, and she cried with resentment, holding herself back. It turned out that Kyle had called his ex-wife Sandy last night to remind her of her son. She had reacted coldly, not wanting to hear about her past life. The woman was quite happy with the way her fate had settled after the divorce. "You say you don't want a son?" Kyle asked her, starting to boil over. "And you're up for being a good father. I'll give you a look at you, Sandy. You're a fool, maybe you are. At least I'm not abandoning my child," I'm sure she was almost laughing. "What do you mean? Have you forgotten that we've been living like strangers lately? Have you lost your memory? It is not your child, not yours, as it is not mine." "Whose is it then? It doesn't matter. And anyway, I'm sick of you. Leave me alone. Why didn't I just block your number?" Sandy was indignant, while Kyle's unpleasant realization dawned on her. David. Yes, silence followed those words, and everything suddenly made sense. Silence. Nothing to say. So live with that for the rest of your life, knowing that your sick child is in an orphanage and your lover works under your ex-husband's boss. "Kyle, don't shame me. He promised to divorce his wife and take care of me and the boy." Sandy's voice shook, but he didn't wait for her remorse and disconnected. David, the restaurant administrator, was scandalously fired. He didn't want to lose his position over some personal relationship. "Get out," Kyle pointed at the door, and the usually cheerful face of the administrator twisted with anger. "Aren't you the boss here?" he said sharply and looked at Jason with hope in his eyes. "I stand in solidarity with my brother," the principal replied tiredly. "If you have thoughts of going to your father, you can waste no time. Will you? I'm sure he's furious that he had to recognize a complete stranger's child as his grandson." After all of this wrangling, Jason went home to not see his brother or anyone at all for a while. When he heard what had happened, he couldn't believe it. Even in the morning, it had seemed like things couldn't have turned out better. She had a place to live, a job, and a very attractive and wealthy man who was paying attention to her. Peter had finally found a family, and the only thing she had to think about was how to get healthy and have a son. "Should I leave now?" she asked without raising her eyes to Kyle. Yes, still in accounting, he cut him off stiffly. After getting the money, she headed over to Peter's house to play with him and take her mind off her heavy thoughts at the same time. Karina, Kyle, and Jason's stepmother opened the door. Seemed more like their sister. "What do you want?" she asked, looking Emily over from head to toe. "I came to study with Peter. Don't come here again." Michael Alexander said not to let you in. She slammed the door right in her guest's face. For a couple minutes, Emily stood like that, looking through the brown metal doors with gold embellishments in the shape of battered plants. This was it. Life was falling apart again. After the happy months with their plans and dreams, there was once again a bleak emptiness, uncertainty, and loneliness. To look for a job again, but that would hardly be easy with a belly like this. And what about Peter? What would they say to him? How will they treat him now? All week, on her way to the store to look for a part-time job, Emily would purposely pass by the orphanage. Maybe she'd see Peter in the window, but there were other little faces peering out from behind the curtains, probably waiting for someone to come for them. There wasn't, but that didn't mean he was all right. She took a walk with the baby over the weekend and had a hurried snack. Emily lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling for a long time, wondering what to do next. The baby was moving slightly inside, and it immediately gave her strength and desire to live, because she was carrying a whole person and could not give up like that. In the corner of the room was a crib, which was gradually filled with tiny things. Instead of a stroller, she bought a sling to carry the baby to the hospital or the store. Not always convenient, but there wasn't enough money for a stroller anyway. There was a knock on the door. She shuddered in surprise, clumsily got up and opened it. "There's a man here to see you," the neighbor said, and went straight to his room. Who could it be? Wasn't David out to avenge his dismissal? Who knows? Emily walked cautiously to the door and looked through the peephole. Jason was standing there. "Hi," he said guiltily when he saw his former subordinate. "Hi." Emily looked at him questioningly, trying to figure out why he was here and if it had anything to do with Peter. "I'm sorry you had to get hurt because of our family squabbles. It's nothing really," he said. Taking the baby with them, they walked outside, leaving the gray yards and heading for the park. Jason took the leash, bought them each a large ice cream cone, and generally acted very attentive and caring. Emily was relieved. It felt so peaceful and good inside all of a sudden. "Do you know how Peter is?" she asked anxiously. "I don't know. I haven't been there in a long time, but I know he's staying at his father's house." While they were walking, Peter was running around the house, fleeing from his foster grandmother. He accidentally broke her favorite vase, and the woman was beyond angry. That's not to say she was really upset about the broken dishes. Rather, she was looking for an excuse to scare him, as she hated her grandson for taking attention away from her. Her husband had become too attached to the boy. The nursery was piled to the ceiling with toys. There were at least 3 scooters and a bicycle in the hallway. On weekends in the house appeared animators in costumes of cartoon characters. And in the evenings, the grandfather liked to sit with his grandson and chat about adventures, read him fairy tales. Such a distraction from her specialty could not help but anger that was not why she had married and pretended to be a model wife, to share the pedestal of the heiress with some child. True, the news that Peter became a bully cooled the ardor of Michael Alexander, and he began to come into the nursery less and less often. But that wasn't enough for Karina. She wanted the boy to go back to the orphanage and not spoil her plans. "Are you sad about work?" Jason asked, stroking the boy's head. "No, I'm not." They sat down on the bench. "Don't worry about it, and don't think about money at all." At one point, she would have been over the moon to hear such words. But too many things were weighing on her, so it was impossible to imagine how to get out of it. "Even if you help, I'm worried about Peter. I've gone to their place several times, but they either didn't open the door for me or Karina put me out with curses and promises to call the police on us. And Peter probably thinks I betrayed him," Emily said with a sigh. "Come on, she's not that scary," Jason smiled. "If you want, I can go over there one of these days, see how things are going, and give Peter something from you." "Oh, that would be great. Go, please," Emily asked, and he nodded in agreement. "But that's not all I'm worried about," she continued. "What else?" Jason asked anxiously, looking at Emily. It suddenly dawned on her that he wasn't just here out of politeness or guilt about being fired. "I have health problems. I haven't had a checkup in a long time. I had to survive, find a job, stay in hotels. I didn't have time for that. And recently they said that I need urgent treatment so that the baby will not be harmed, and I will be able to give birth safely. And what do you need for that?" "It's just a question of money." Jason was frightened. Emily sighed. She wanted to tell him that she had only enough money to pay for 2 months' rent and groceries, not to mention medicine and vitamins. But she couldn't. "Don't ask for anything. You'll manage somehow," she said to herself, and added aloud that she was the one complaining. "Don't listen to her. Everything will be all right." Jason hugged her. Nothing in return for the endless fear and helplessness came a sense of calm and even a sense of happiness. He arrived at the communal apartment again that evening, this time with 2 bags of groceries. Jason looked pleased, as if he'd accomplished something very good, or he'd had a brilliant idea that he couldn't share yet. "This is for you," he said cheerfully. "Thank you so much," Emily brightened. "Did something happen?" "I won't tell you before I tell you, but I promise you'll like it." With that, he left, and Emily greedily went through the goodies he'd brought her. She'd been saving money lately, buying only what she needed. And here were a variety of fruits, nuts, sweets, and yogurt. And among the variety of goodies, she found an envelope with the inscription, "No refusals are accepted for medicines. We need you healthy." Emily pressed the envelope to her chest, stroking her belly. Her baby was safe. Emily would be treated, and all should be well. It seemed to be the happiest moment she'd had in a while. Jason hadn't told her his plan until the last minute, apparently afraid she'd say no. So she didn't know where he was taking her until they pulled up to Michael Alexander's house. "We're going to Peter's," she asked cautiously. "Yes, but first to my father's." "Say, would you like to take Peter in with you if you have a place to live?" "I'm not arguing, just say yes or no." "Of course I would," Emily said. She wanted to adopt Peter, but she didn't want to live off Jason. And that was exactly what he was thinking, judging by his questions. There was no way out. Overcome with self-doubt, she followed him straight to Michael Alexander's office. They came to the end of the chicly laid-back hallway, the door ajar, and a blonde head peeked out. Emily waved at Peter, and he smiled back. "We'll be in to see you soon," she said. The restaurateur was half reclining in a large armchair with a book in his hands, clearly surprised to see the uninvited guests. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" he asked in his usual polite manner. "Hi, Daddy. We need to talk," Jason said simply. "All right, I'm listening." Michael Alexander sounded displeased. He certainly didn't want to have any conversation. "We want to raise Peter on our own. You don't want him, do you?" The man grinned, lifted himself up, and threw his finger to the side. "Oh, how? Do you want—" "Yes, we sure do," Jason answered, looking into his father's eyes. Emily's heart warmed at those words. So her youngest son had grown up. "All right then, you can raise him if you want to live. Where will you be?" Michael Alexander thought, returning to his semi-reclined position and folding his hands on his stomach. "Not here, I hope," Jason said. "I'm getting ready to leave." "Then we're taking him." Peter stood tall and stepped out from behind the door, afraid he'd miss the moment when the guests left. He had decided for himself that he would check out, grab onto Emily, and never let go, because he couldn't sit alone and put up with Karen's nagging anymore, and his grandfather had almost stopped paying attention to him. "Emily, I've missed you so much," he said, hugging her as hard as he could, and then he hurried on. "Please don't leave me here. Please, please don't. I don't want to stay here anymore." "Of course I won't, Peter. Come on, pack your things and let's go. And there's a surprise waiting for you at home." The boy's eyes lit up at those words. He ran into his room and began clumsily putting his clothes into his backpack. He and Jason helped him gather the essentials and find his favorite toys. As they left the house, the company spotted Karen by her bright red, shiny car in the yard. She looked at them with disdain and smiled contentedly, realizing that the baby was no longer in her house. Peter hid behind Emily's back. As they walked past, no one noticed that Michael Alexander was watching them at that moment from the office window. He sighed and watched the car drive away until it disappeared around the corner. That evening, the surprise was not only for the boy who had long dreamed of a dog. Emily stood for a long time in the hallway of the apartment Jason had brought them to. That was the position he'd caught her in when he lifted her things out of the trunk. "What are you doing? Come on in," he said, smiling, and set the bags on the floor. From the living room came a cheerful murmur. Peter and the baby were already settling into their new accommodations and rolling around on the floor in their arms, one snickering, the other wincing. "I don't believe it," Emily muttered quietly. "Don't believe me." "Why not?" Jason got upset. "I don't," she smiled back. "I don't believe it happens like this, and that we're going to live in an apartment like this." Scared you. It's a fun apartment, like an apartment. It'll do for the first time. But for the future, of course, we need a larger one. He helped them clean up and put things away, and then he left, leaving them to settle in. In a day of joyful upheaval, Peter fell asleep immediately, and with him the baby, poking his wet red nose into the blanket. He was sleeping peacefully, not the other way around. For a long time she couldn't settle down to lie down. The days she had spent in her room with fear, contemplating the future, were imprinted in her with perpetual worry and dread. Thus, the birth of their son seemed to be an unpredictable and terrifying event, and their further existence in a small apartment with a shared bathroom and kitchen, a constant domestic discomfort. Now she wandered quietly through the stylishly furnished living room, looked into the kitchen, admired the snow-white bathroom with a large mirror and a warm floor. She looked out the window at the lights of the city at night. It was more like a dream than reality. For the first time, it seemed, in her entire life, she felt completely safe. Sleep caught up with her toward morning. Jason had paid for 3 months' rent at once. He'd helped set up the crib, brought gifts, and just visited often. At first, Emily had been haunted by the feeling that there was some intent or deception behind it all. Then came a sense of obligation to Jason. But thanks to a sincerity and kindness toward them, all of that soon passed and she was just glad for the idol. What did the doctors say? He inquired on one of his visits. All is well, they say. In November I will give birth. Son is healthy, developing perfectly, and weight is normal, said Emily. And she thought involuntarily what a good dad Jason would be. Somewhere in the back of her mind was the hope that he would love her baby and Peter as if they were his own. Oh, and guess what? While I was driving to the women's health clinic, I met Peter and his babysitter from the orphanage. What does she say? He asked politely. I didn't think it was a good idea to tell him about it after all. Oh, nothing. Glad Peter's living well now. Not that everyone there remembers him, because no one but him spent so much time at the window waiting. At that moment, a toddler in star-spangled pajamas and a scarf around his neck came running into the kitchen. And Peter, with an equally cheerful hairdo and a smeared face, ran in following. Mom, you know how he runs fast like an athlete, the boy said, panting. And, apparently coming to his senses, looked with big eyes at Emily, and then at Jason, said, what exactly? Great. Maybe we'll put him in the runner sports section. Emily smiled. She reached over, hugged him, and whispered in his ear, I love you, son. Peter brightened, took the candy from the table, and ran back into the living room, but immediately returned and cheerfully declared, I always knew it. In the light of events, the babysitter story was forgotten and no longer remembered as completely insignificant. Jason and Emily spent the rest of the evening quietly discussing the changes that had taken place in Peter's life over the past month. How he'd grown, how he'd stopped startling at night, how he'd taken responsibility for walking his favorite dog, and now these new, unfamiliar feelings, warm, joyful, overwhelming. But as soon as Jason left and all the chores were done, the thoughts returned. The babysitter they'd accidentally bumped into when they decided to walk from the hospital to the house. It had been creepy. She was such a chatterbox and would talk nonstop about everything that was going on in and out of the orphanage. We love Peter dearly, of course. It's so good that you took him in and that everything worked out for him. He is a wonderful boy, kind, responsive, whatever you ask always does. He just stands by the window. I feel sorry for him. I know he's waiting for his mom and dad, but I can't help him. The woman approached the territory, waving her grocery bags amusingly. Thank you for loving the children so much. Emily smiled. Who's your second child? A boy or a girl? Not jealous? No, I think we have enough love and attention for all of them, answered the nanny. That's good. And then there are all sorts of people. First they leave and then they come back. And the child has waited so long for her. Have you heard something? That someone had come to Peter's house before? Emily was surprised, but she thought she'd misunderstood. No, the woman mumbled. But I'm not going to keep quiet, so I'll just say it as it is. A woman came here, asking about him again. At first, she said she was a distant relative. She came to see him. She was interested in who took the child, were they to a family or just transferred to another institution. Then we got to talking. I even had time to cry. What did she say? Why did she decide to find out about her son after all these years? The unexpected news knocked Emily off her feet. Was this woman really going to take the baby away? Why would she want him? Because, like Kyle said, she lived in luxury and didn't need any children. Well, who knows her, the nanny said. The man, I understand, let her down. A new wife, mother-in-law, did some nasty things. But don't worry, I didn't tell her anything. It's strictly forbidden. Well, thank you for telling me about the wife. I don't remember the details. Like she was the one who convinced her to keep the baby in the hospital, and then she fought with my father's brother all the time, tried to break him up. In general, some unpleasant woman in their family. Sighed the nanny. Oh, thank you very much again, Emily said quickly, deciding to go the other way. She needed to be alone with her thoughts. You take good care of Peter and come visit sometime. You're always welcome, Nanny said good-naturedly. Of course we will, Emily promised as they walked through the yards, past houses, playgrounds, and parking lots. Emily was determined that she would call Michael Alexander and tell him what she had learned. It felt like something unkind was lurking in his young wife. At that moment, she had no idea how fatal her call would be, upsetting him and his sons, and leaving Peter, to whom he was attached as a grandson. The elderly businessman would be all alone. Of course, he had a staff of assistants, a driver, a gardener, a cook, a maid, and Michael Alexander had a wife young, beautiful, slender, and spectacular. But none of these people really needed him. Everyone was only after his monetary interest. He handed over all the business affairs to Karina, and himself spent most of his time at home, sitting in his incredible size chair, drinking his favorite coffee and reading books. These cases brought him pleasure, but could not replace the simple live communication. With trembling hands, she dialed the number she had secretly written down from David's notebook long ago. "Hello," came the harsh male voice. "Michael Alexander, hello, it's Emily. You probably don't even want to hear from me, but there's something I really need to tell you." "It's important," she said quickly, in one breath so as not to slip up. She was surprised when, instead of hanging up or saying mean things, the man seemed pleased. "Hi, Emily, go ahead," he said in a measured tone. "One man was very persuasive about leaving the baby in the hospital, and he also tried to quarrel you and your sons and them among themselves. This person is your wife, Karina. I don't know how to explain it to you, but I think she's dangerous to you. Please be careful. Take care of yourself." "Understood," Michael Alexander said after almost a minute's silence. "Thank you. Tell Jason and Peter not to take offense at me." "Okay, I will." What happened next? She didn't know. Whether he listened to what she said, or whether he took it as silly fiction, or whether he told Karina about it. And they laughed together. Whatever it was, she did what she had to do. Let them deal with it themselves. She didn't dare say anything more. Emily was afraid of Jason's reaction. He hadn't liked to talk about his family since he'd been fired, and he didn't want to talk to his relatives. The news came on a most unexpected day. Since morning, she did not pull up her stomach, lying in the bathtub, but the contractions did not let go. On the contrary, little by little they intensified, although so far they were absolutely tolerable. Deciding to herself that there was enough money for the trip, she did not call the doctor and began to pack a bag to the maternity hospital. At that very moment, Jason knocked on the door, excited and pleased. "You're not going to believe this," he announced loudly, taking off his jacket. "My dad just called me. He was surprised. Yeah, he invited us over for a peace offering." "What about his Karina? She doesn't like guests." "But there is no Karina anymore," he added with a laugh. "Where did she go?" Emily, too, was amused by how funny Jason could be. But then a grimace of pain crossed her face, and the smile on his face changed to one of alarm. "What's wrong? Does it hurt?" He was frightened. "I'm going to the hospital." "It's time," Emily said in a snap and pointed to the clear bag on the bed. "So what's up with Karina, huh?" "Well, screw Karina. How are you going to do it? Right now? What am I supposed to do?" "Don't worry," she smiled. "I'll pack now and we'll go quietly. Just pick Peter up from daycare tonight, please, and tell him we'll be back soon with his brother." Jason was a little calmer now, but he still looked at her anxiously. And there was no doubt about Peter. He was in good hands for distractions on the road. Emily did ask to tell the interesting story of Karina's disappearance, though. It turned out that after that call, Michael Alexander really became suspicious, hired a private investigator, installed hidden cameras in the house, which he viewed in real time. That kind of vigilance proved to be very useful. His wife was going to poison her elderly husband and present everything as an accident. Mixed up, they say, the medicine drank what was needed. His heart couldn't take it. Dobre, Karina waved away, when her husband showed her a video where she slips a pill into the coffee. "What's crazy?" Michael Alexander laughed, surprised at her insolence. "It's your medicine. The doctor prescribed it." "I forgot. He already prescribed drops, not pills," he continued, forcing her to justify herself. "They weren't on the prescription. I bought the pills. If you don't want them, don't take them. I care about you, and you're suspicious. Show me the pills. Leave me alone. You senile old man." She screamed hysterically and ran to the kitchen to hide the medicine, but her husband beat her to it. How can you be so cruel? Emily shook her head indignantly. What did her father do? He kicked her out as usual and threatened to go to the police if she tried to hurt him or us again. Although I think we should have filed a report. This is a real assassination attempt. Emily was met in the waiting room and asked to go to the ward. As they parted, they hugged, and Jason whispered in her ear, "It's going to be okay. I love you." It was amazing how much those words affected her. It felt so warm and safe at once. The boy was born late that night, and Jason and Peter were with them in the morning. They were admiring the red face and the white bonnet. The baby opened one eye and looked at him seriously and smacked his lips softly. "Will he always be so small?" Peter asked in a whisper. "No, he will grow up quickly, learn to run, and you will play together in the cars." "You," said his mother. "I don't know what to do with such a little one," the boy exhaled. "Really?" Jason and Emily exchanged understanding looks. After they were discharged, Mikey's grandfather and uncle wanted to meet the newborn. Emily only smiled as she watched a broad-shouldered and sad Michael Alexander gently rock the baby while Kyle gave him advice on what lullaby to sing to help the baby sleep better. The family is finally reunited. A year and a half after these events, Emily began to leave her youngest son with a nanny and herself returned to the restaurant where she was now in charge of things in the kitchen. The guests loved the menu, which was updated with her participation, so there was plenty of work to do. One thing had been troubling her heart all this time, but Jason was so preoccupied with work and the children that he kept putting off a decision that was important to both of them. Finally, one day, arriving at the restaurant, as usual by 9, Emily discovered a sign at the entrance that read "Special Service." "What is that?" She wondered and walked inside to the lounge exit. A path of pink petals. Trying not to step on them, Emily stepped forward, planning to reprimand the new receptionist for not telling her in advance about the festivities, what the menu would be, how many people would be there, and what time they would be arriving. With the thoughts in her head getting confused. Maybe that was why she didn't immediately realize what was going on. The hall was decorated with fresh flowers and ribbons, and in the center stood a large cake with champagne and glasses. All the restaurant staff were crowded around it, and Michael Alexander was here, and behind them was someone else. Jason, Emily said more out of surprise than any desire to address her lover. He came out to her satisfied, happy in a suit, and with a bouquet in his hands. Only now did she remember yesterday's hints, dressing up and the suspicious need to leave early this morning. Oh, good thing I wore a dress, Emily thought, feeling her legs and arms begin to tremble with excitement. "My sweet Emily." Jason began very formally. "We've been together for so long, but I kept putting this event off. The household, the moves, the kids. Everything seemed like the wrong time, but now I'm ready." He pulled a box out of his pocket and opened it. Inside glittered a gold ring set with many small shining diamonds. "Marry me," he smiled, and Emily glowed back, nodding, "Of course," and all the guests applauded. The next event swirled before her like a kaleidoscope. The flowers, the white dress, Peter in his first business suit, Jason's delighted face when she walked out to him, and they got into a white car decorated with gold rings. Music, clinking glasses, the glitter of flares. Guests twirled in a dance, winking, smiling at the newlyweds, who also kept up and set the tone for the entire evening. In the midst of all this splendor, she was transported back for a moment, and a long fenced-in area, a rosary in Zoe's face. Her past appeared before her. At that moment, the closest thing to it. The first date, the elopement, the trains, the markets. Surprisingly, she'd almost forgotten that time, even though it had seemed like it was with her forever at the time. What would have happened if she hadn't decided to climb over the fence, get into the car, and drive off into the unknown with her hands dirty after work, without belongings and without money? It's scary to imagine. And how great everything turned out in the end after so many years of hardships, trials, and worries. Suddenly, the frightening images of childhood and youth blurred. Music, voices, and joyful laughter around her came back again. The smiling faces of her friends spun around. Yes, now she is where she feels good. The people she loves the most, Emily, her mom and her wife, are around. And there are still a lot of pleasant troubles ahead. Family joys, children's laughter, small gifts for holidays, joint trips to the movies, and much more. Now everything will definitely be very good. A father sets up a camera to save his fading daughter, and after barely a glance at the tape, Jane decided at an early age that girls were either beautiful or smart. The girl knew full well she could choose, and she chose to be smart. In front of her eyes was the example of her older sister Ellen. Everyone around admired her beauty. I mean, come on, light blonde hair, silky green, mermaid eyes. A figure they call such a model. Helene, from an early age, was focused only on her appearance. She read a lot, but it was fashion magazines with advice on makeup, diets, and so on. And Kate's girlfriends were exactly the same. Jane thought they were pretty, frivolous fools. A mother raising 2 daughters alone had high hopes for her eldest. "When you marry well, Ellen, we'll have a good life," she used to say. Jane was still a very young girl, studying in the 4th or 5th grade. The girl was frankly perplexed. How could one put the responsibility for her happiness and well-being on some other person? Did her mother, who had been burned herself, not draw the right conclusions? Once Jane asked her mother directly, "You married your father for his money too, and he left us, went to a younger and prettier, and left nothing for you or the children because she had a good appetite. And now you're telling Ellen to do the same thing, so she'll do the same." Blaspheme on your tongue. Mum shook her hands. "Helene is different. Firstly, she's young, and secondly, she's much prettier than me. And anyway, she has me. I'm the one who had to figure it out. And I'll help her, and I'll teach her everything. You'll be fine, and so will you, if you listen to me." Jane just sighed heavily. Her mother was beautiful and kind, but she was too easygoing. Both her mother and Ellen lived with rose-colored glasses on their eyes. Everyone dreamed of a beautiful life, believed that looks were the determining factor in a woman's success. But it wasn't so for everyone. Jane differed from her peers' warehouse of character, has always been pragmatic, responsible, far-sighted. And she clearly understood that, in order to achieve something in this life, you need to work hard. And the options that have in mind mother and older sister, rich men, benefactors, it's all unreliable, fragile, illusory. Ellen jokingly called her little sister a bore. Her mother was always trying to remake Jane, to impose her point of view on her daughter. The most interesting thing is that the parent sincerely believed that she wished her child well. She said, "I'm worried about your future. How can you not understand? You are a beauty. We got such a one. You got the best from me and your father. When you finish school, we'll find you a wealthy fiancé. Don't be such a bore. Men like cheerful, smiling women." "No, thank you," Jane replied. "After school, I'm going to study economics." "But do you know what the competition is?" Ellen would always argue at this point. "You either have to be 7 inches in the head, or you have to have a good deal of goodwill." "Yes," Mum sighed. "We can't afford commercial education. And you can't get in for free." But Jane, trying not to listen to the arguments of her sister and mother, strived for her goal. Day and night she sat over textbooks, looked for additional courses on the internet, mostly free, because her mother, who worked as a cashier in the local supermarket, had no money for her daughter's education, and her father almost did not participate in the children's lives. He had a new family. No, he still transferred some pennies of alimony, but everything was limited to that. No communication, no support or help in difficult situations. Jane knew from childhood that she could not count on him. The girl in her heart wanted at least once to meet and talk to her second parent. It seemed to her that, perhaps, the character she went just in it, because the mother in Helen Jane did not resemble at all. But he did not seek to meet his daughters. And Jane didn't want to impose. And it was scary to face indifference, or even worse, dislike of a native man. Dad was a businessman, owned a chain of shops, so sort of made good money. But all his property was prudently written down on the new wife, so that the ex-wife and children did not claim anything. It looked ugly, petty, even mean. In theory, Jane should have been as resentful of her father as her mother was, as Ellen was. But Jane had a dream to study to be an economist, to start her own business, and one day to meet her father on some business, a joint project, a profitable contract, something like that. Let him see what his daughter had achieved on her own, without his help. and then maybe they could talk as equals. And Jane achieved her goal. She got into the budget, to the same economics faculty, where she was so eager to go. How happy she was when she saw herself on the list of enrolled. She was screaming right in front of the computer monitor, jumping from happiness to the ceiling. "You're crazy," Ellen said as she looked into the room with little Andrew in her arms. She had recently become a mother and had a son with a rich man. He paid child support, but he was reluctant to communicate with his mother and Andrew himself. Needless to say, these alimony were pennies a standard scheme. Gray earnings, most of the income is hidden. Ellen still repeated the fate of her mother, even in an even worse version. But she was not going to give up and continued to dream of a prince who will definitely sooner or later solve all her financial problems. Her mother supported her eldest daughter in everything, adored her grandson. It was not surprising. Jane was also happy to take care of the baby when she had time. But the girl did not understand how it was possible not to draw conclusions from what had happened. Was it not clear? The plan is not very good and often fails. It was time to choose another option. But no, Ellen was still looking for rich men on dating sites. Jane explained her strange behavior to her sister. "Wow. Cool. So what, you're leaving us for the big city now? You're going to go to school?" Jane and her family actually lived in a city too, but a very small one, far from the regional center. So gray 3-story houses, whole streets of old wooden barracks, a huge private sector. Not a village by documents, of course, but in fact it is a village. That's why Orchardville, the regional capital, where Jane's university was located, was called just town. Her mother, too, was happy to hear of her youngest daughter's admission. She had never hoped for such a thing. As it turned out, she thought. Let her dream, show off, and when she realizes that nothing has worked out, she will follow in her mother's footsteps to the supermarket for the cash register. But also will think, finally, over the words of more experienced relatives, realize it is necessary to look for a rich and reliable man. And here's how it all turned out. Jane got in. "Well done," the daughter hugged the younger mother. "I'll help you in any way I can. I'm sorry, I won't be able to send much money, but at least a little for housing and living expenses. Again, you need to dress nicely. There's a better chance of meeting a decent man in a big city." "Mum, there you go again," Jane smiled. She was touched by the fact that her mother supported and understood her, and even offered to help her. Jane knew it wasn't easy for her mother to get the money, but she was willing to help her daughter while she was a student. And that's priceless. Jane had a new life. She was given a room in the student dormitory, though not a separate one. The room had to be shared with 2 girls. But the roommates turned out to be very pleasant. Both studied at the Pedagogical Institute. Both, just like Jane herself, were focused on study and work. In general, the girls had a lot in common. With one of these neighbors, Kate, Jane even became friends. They stayed in touch even after they finished their studies and moved out to rented flats. Jane liked her studies. She was convinced in her first year that she had chosen the right direction. She found economics easy, lectures seemed interesting, and term papers and tests were incredibly easy. Jane even began to earn money. It turned out that people were willing to pay a lot of money by her standards, of course, for essays and projects. The girl had to work part-time and study a lot. She had no time at all for student parties, going to clubs and similar entertainments. And sometimes, of course, Jane wanted to go for a walk, to unwind. But she realized that every minute counted. Her time was too precious. Besides, there was no money. Her mother tried to top up her daughter's card with a small amount every month. Jane knew that it was a significant part of her mother's salary, and she was very grateful to her. It was not enough, very little. Still, it was the help from her mom that kept Jane afloat. Especially after the 3rd year, when suddenly something in the university clinic changed, and students were obliged to pay for the dormitory. And before it was possible to live in it for free. Jane saved money on literally everything. But she couldn't keep up. She knew that she was going to her goal, which means that sooner or later everything will be fine. Everything will be fine. Everything will be as she dreamed. But on New Year's Eve, an event happened that made Jane reconsider her plans and turned her whole life upside down. It happened at that hectic time when before the New Year students try to pass all credits in time to start the winter session after the holiday without debts. Jane was just getting ready for a credit in economic history when she received a phone call from her sister. Helen's picture popped up on the screen. On it, the girl was smiling broadly and looked like a star. Jane knew at once that something was wrong. Ellen would not call her at the third hour of the night. It was Jane who was awake, preparing for exams. And her sister herself at that time should be having her seventh dream. Mom's in trouble. Ellen's voice rang through the receiver. It seemed she was close to hysterics. Come over. What's wrong? Jane felt her limbs grow cold and her stomach felt empty for some reason. Anxiety gripped her heart with an icy hand. Was she alive? But it was impossible to get a coherent answer from Ellen. She was already sobbing and sobbing into the receiver, dropping only a few insignificant phrases. Mostly they were wails about how she was afraid and badly off, as if the trouble had happened in the evening, but Ellen was informed only now, just a couple of minutes ago, and she immediately dialed her sister. Of course, at that moment there was no question of any credits and exams. Jane took the first flight home in the morning. She was almost the only passenger at the bus station at such an early hour. Jane found her sister in a terrible state, her hair disheveled, her face swollen with tears. In her arms she held her youngest daughter, Lillian, a baby girl. Ellen was already a mother of many children. Her eldest son, Andrew, then two girls, yearlings, Chris and Lillian. None of the fathers were involved in the upbringing of the children. The princes, sons of wealthy parents, refused to raise offspring and basked in money. With Helene, they were just having fun, with nothing serious in mind. And she kept stepping on the same rake, getting pregnant on purpose in the hope of finding a happy, strong family. If something happens to me, how will I cope with them alone? Ellen looked at Jane with confused eyes, as if expecting her to offer a way out. But Jane was ready to hit her sister at that moment. She didn't know what was wrong with her mother, and she was only thinking about herself. How did it happen? She asked. They had a corporate party, Ellen said, rocking her daughter. They must have been drinking. They told me Mum was crossing the road in the wrong place. Jumped out in front of that bus. The driver couldn't do anything. He's in shock himself. He's kind of in hospital now, too. He had a heart attack right there on the spot while it was being sorted out. While they were sorting it out. I got a call late last night, and I called you straight away. So Mum's alive? Jane clarified. That was the most important thing to her. What hospital is she in? A hospital not far away. Jane jumped out of the house, hailed a taxi. She had to get there as soon as possible. She had to find out what was wrong with her loved one. At the hospital, Jane got the terrible news. Mum's gone. She'd only recently passed away. As Jane rushed to the clinic, it all happened in the ICU. The doctor then said that there was no chance of a good outcome. The injuries were too serious. And Jane would not have been able to say goodbye to her mother anyway. She was in a coma. And still the girl blamed herself for her carelessness, for not supporting her mother by the hand while she was still alive. Jane was signing some papers when she received a phone call from a sobbing Ellen. She had been informed by someone on the nursing staff, and now the older sister was in a state of near panic. It had been a difficult time. Arranging the funeral, trying to bring the sister who had to look after her babies no matter what, and the gradual realization of the terrible fact that the nearest and dearest person in the world was now gone. Just no, that's all. The father did not turn up at the funeral, although he could not have been unaware of what had happened. This man did not even call his daughters, did not try to understand whether they need his help. Probably thought they were adults. They were both over 18. So legally, the father was no longer their debtor. He paid child support until his daughters came of age, and there was nothing more to expect. It was then that Jane realized that she would not meet or communicate with this man, even when she reached the top of her career. He didn't need her and Ellen and Mum. Neither did they need him. There was no resentment. No, it's just that Jane suddenly realized her father was a complete stranger to her. They may look alike in some ways, but Dad is a stranger. He's just a stranger, and that says it all. Ellen, on the other hand, is her own person. She needs support. Ellen sobbed nonstop for days. Jane didn't stop her. Let her cry it out. It would make her feel better. While her sister dealt with her grief, Jane helped her with her nieces. The little ones made her smile even in such a dreadful situation. It was impossible to look indifferently at their funny games, to listen to their cute babbling. The nieces, like nothing else, showed Jane that life goes on. Jane could not stay with her sister for long. The winter session. Ellen had already recovered a little and even started monitoring dating sites again. Now she wanted a supportive adult around her even more. Her mum was gone. Jane's session, in spite of everything, passed with honors. That meant an increased scholarship, but the money wouldn't even be enough to rent a room for a month. The dormitory became paid because you still had to eat, dress, pay for travel. Jane tried to combine her studies and work in the cafeteria. It turned out to be impossible. Immediately, a lot of passes and debts were accumulated. As a result, the girl did not even get admission to the next session. Expulsion loomed ahead. Teachers took into account the previous merits of the girl and went to her satisfaction. But she still failed. The only way out was to transfer to the correspondence department. Only here's the catch: the budget places were all taken. The commercial option cost a fabulous amount of money for Jane. The rector suggested a way out. One day he called Jane to his office and offered her the only, in his opinion, suitable option. "I know your situation. You wouldn't wish it on your enemy," began the conversation with a man who always reminded Jane of Carlson as good-natured, full, and short. "Student, you are diligent and promising. I want to help such a person. That's why I'll close the session for you. No matter what. Let us draw red lines. And you take a year's leave of absence. I'll help you get a job for family reasons. Get the money for your studies. You can do it. You're a man of determination. And when you come back, I'll help you with all the details. How's that?" Jane thought about it. She didn't want to interrupt her studies. On the other hand, what other options did she have? The session is not passed, that's for sure. So she'd have to drop out. And where to go? Go home to her parents' flat? Her mother's new boyfriend is already living there. A young and kind of nice guy named George. Unlike the previous aluminum suitors, he's not a rich major. The guy works on a construction site, working from dawn to dusk, earning money. Seems to like Ellen a lot, and he's taken in her kids. Maybe they'll actually make a family. Jane's not really needed there right now. And she doesn't want to live with her sister. No, Jane loves her very much. She's the only person in the whole world who's family. But still, Jane's used to peace, solitude, freedom. And there's a family of many children. You can't do that there. And after all, I don't want to leave Chicago. It's a big city. It's beautiful, spacious, interesting. There are more prospects for work and study here. The urban settlement, where Jane's childhood was spent, was associated with rage and hopeless longing. No, she didn't want to go back there at all. "You know, I think I'll take you up on your offer." Jane smiled at the rector. "What a clever girl," asked the man. "You're good. Everything will work out for you. Just don't forget to save for your studies. Be sure to come back to the university in a year. We'll be waiting for you." Deal? It's a deal. Thank you so much for the offer. That same night, Jane started looking for a job. She urgently needed money just to survive, to buy food, to pay for a roof over her head, the most effective motivation. It turned out that it was simply unrealistic for a girl with an incomplete university degree to find anything close to the desired profession. Jane was rejected everywhere. Employers did not even consider candidates without a diploma. The girl realized that she could show herself at the interview, but it did not even come to that. After a couple of days of fruitless searches, Jane realized that it was time to give up her dream of working as an economist, or rather to postpone it until better times. In the meantime, she had to find something. When the bar was lowered a bit, things got better. There were plenty of jobs for Jane: waitress, cleaner, saleswoman, but the wages were meager. No, it was enough to live on, especially if you saved money. But Jane had to save up for a year's study. With those salaries, it was impossible. Still, Jane needed a job badly. Immediately, she chose the path of a waitress in a bar in the city center. There were plenty of reasons for the job. Firstly, there was extra pay for night shifts. Secondly, tips were very helpful, sometimes even very generous. And thirdly, the last job gave Jane the opportunity to write term papers and tests to order, and an extra penny in the piggy bank, and brains are not idle. That's the upside. Jane even liked working in the bar. The team is friendly, The bosses are loyal. The crowd was decent. It was a rock bar whose owners cared about their reputation. The atmosphere was monitored. Undesirable elements were expelled with guards and not allowed back in. And another and another. Local band musicians, performers, and visiting guests gathered here every night. In short, live music, and it was beautiful. Jane enjoyed listening to the musicians perform, singing along, dancing. This was welcome in the bar. To work as on holiday, in the bar Jane finally understood the meaning of this common phrase. Of course, with a waitress's salary, there was not much money. Jane was looking for another job in parallel, a higher paying one. But the girl knew, even when she had to quit, she would come here to visit, just to be in this amazingly warm atmosphere. The rock bar and new friends helped Jane through her grief. Of course, the longing for her mother did not go anywhere, but the girl was finally able to return to life and believe that there are still a lot of good things ahead. It was in the rock bar that Jane met Jasper. One day the host introduced the guests to a new rock band which appeared just a couple of months ago. Jasper was the bass player. But not only that, it was he who owned the idea to create this band. He was the one who wrote the songs and the music. Modest, always kept in the shadows, but constantly observing the behavior of the band members, the reaction of the audience. Jasper was the main man in the team. Although on stage most of the attention was drawn to the lead singer, it was felt. It was noticeable from the first glance. For some reason, Jane immediately singled him out and reached for him. She didn't recognize herself. Jane realized that she was not in a position to fall in love and have affairs. She was focused on her career, on her studies, on getting back on track at university. She couldn't be distracted by that. And yet, Jasper didn't flirt with the waitresses, didn't talk to anyone first. He was serious, focused on his work. Maybe that's what attracted the girl. Jasper was a lot like herself. Jasper began to appear in the bar often, sometimes with a group to work with, sometimes just in the company of mates to relax. Of course, they soon got to know each other, but he still acted aloof, not overtly sympathetic. Sometimes, though, Jane caught his eye. But Jasper turned away immediately, talking to someone else. And Jane wanted him to pay attention to her, to compliment her, to show her signs of attention, as visitors often did. And then Jane would let him know that she was interested in him. Once there was a girl in Jasper's company. Representatives of the fair half of humanity had come with him before, but they were just friends, girlfriends of other members of the group. And this one was clearly something between them. They didn't kiss or hug, nothing like that. But sometimes they exchanged tender glances and smiled very warmly at each other. Once she put her head right on his shoulder, and Jasper, usually cold and even stern, stroked her hair in a natural and very gentle gesture, as if she were a kitten. A very unpleasant feeling came into Jane's breast from behind the gate. She recognized it immediately, of course. It was jealousy. With surprising meticulousness, Jane began to pick out her rival's faults. Too thin, not even pretty. That nose, long, liquid hair. Anyway, how can this madam compare to her, Jane? For the first time in her life, Jane seemed to feel smug about her appearance. Nature had endowed her, like Helene, with beauty. Jane had heard many compliments from others about her figure. Tall, slender, long-legged. Her friends generally advised her to try her hand at modeling. Only this job was not to Jane's liking at all. Well, she did not know how to show herself, even considered it humiliating. And now, despite such impressive external data, the rival became such a gray mouse. In general, there was nothing outstanding in Jasper's companion, not even something to catch his eye. Nevertheless, he clearly had very tender feelings for her. The presence of this girl made him happy. Jane watched Jasper closely and could tell this for sure he loved his companion. It was painful. Thanks to the girl that Jasper was so attracted to, Jane had made up her mind, decided to do something she'd never considered unacceptable before. Her shift was coming to an end, but as usual she stayed late to help a waitress friend serve tables on a Saturday night. There were a lot of customers, and Jane waited for an opportune moment. She'd even had a few drinks beforehand for courage, to make her feel more confident and relaxed. Jasper stood up and headed for the exit. Someone had called him. The music was blaring in the bar, impossible to talk on the phone in this environment. Everyone was either outside on the porch of the bar or in the smoking room. Jasper chose the street. Jane followed him like a shadow now or never. The obnoxious girl who had been sitting next to Jasper all evening remained at the table. She chatted cheerfully with his mates. It was obvious that they had all known each other for a long time. They must be in a long and serious relationship. Still, Jane would try, or she'd regret later that she'd never even tried. Jasper stepped out onto the porch. He paced the area in front of the bar, patiently explaining something to someone. Jane watched him through the large window. Jasper wasn't smiling, wasn't joking. Apparently the conversation was serious or unpleasant. It didn't matter. Jane would still approach him as soon as. Jasper pressed the reset button and was about to go back to the bar, but at that moment Jane came out to meet him. Luckily, they were alone on the porch at that moment. "Hi," Jane smiled at him. Jane smiled at him. Jasper looked at her with interest. "We said hello," Jane nodded. "I need to talk to you." Jasper immediately tuned into the conversation. He showed that he was ready to listen. He could have dismissed her, or shown irritation or displeasure. But Jasper looked at her with his dark, intelligent eyes and waited. "I like you, and I've liked you for a long time," Jane decided to cut to the chase. "I'm magnetically attracted to you. It's never happened to me before. I don't know what to do about it." Jane lowered her eyes. There, she'd said it. What's next? Jasper was probably looking for words to reject her as politely as possible. He probably was. Jane suddenly felt unbearably ashamed of what she'd done. Why had she gone to him? How could she look him in the eye after all this? Jasper often came to the bar. And then Jane felt his hands on her shoulders. A gentle touch, as if she were some incredibly fragile vessel. Jane, her name came out of Jasper's lips and sounded like beautiful music to the girl. Jane, I couldn't even imagine such a thing. Jasper looked at her and smiled. He so rarely smiled after all. His eyes, the girl could see it clearly, shone with happiness. Sincere, real happiness. What's going on? Was he happy to hear her confession? Instead of words, Jasper kissed Jane. It made the girl dizzy. He had his arms around her. He held her, or rather even held her, because her legs were literally shaking from the kiss. Then he stroked her back and head and held her gently against him. I've been watching you for a long time, too, and I'm drawn to you in the same way. Then why? Jane didn't understand. I didn't even notice it once. I thought you didn't care. I didn't mean to embarrass you, Jasper said. You shouldn't. Anyway, I'm older. Older for you. I thought you were attracted to other guys, brutal, successful. With your looks, anything's possible. You're beautiful. You're unreal. You even inspired my song. Didn't realize I'm an Olympic princess? Is that about me? Jane asked. No, she admitted. It's a very beautiful song. I love it. I didn't realize it came from you. Oh yeah, it's just... What about that girl who came with you? Are you two together? Together, Jasper grinned. Ever since my parents brought me a pink bow tied to a box from the maternity ward and told me Lassie was my sister. So she's your sister? Jane laughed. I thought she was. That's why I decided to have this conversation today. Sister and Sister, Jasper said, pulling Jane tighter against him and breathing in the scent of her hair. Passing through town. She's been married a long time, lives with her husband. Far away. She missed her wayward brother. Jane and Jasper started seeing each other. Turns out he'd been hitting on the pretty waitress all this time. Why didn't he make any moves on her? I was going to. But later, when he's a little more cash flush. He had a clear message: a girl shouldn't be a loser. So far, there was too much to do with the band, organizing gigs and so on. But the guys were already starting to earn money from their songs. The prospects were looking good. And strange as it may seem for a rock musician, Jasper was shy with girls. No, he had a lot of friends with whom he could chat and laugh together. But Jane evoked a very special feeling in him. And that made Jasper, who was used to performing in front of hundreds of people, timid. But Jane made the first step, shattering all of Jasper's doubts. And now they were together. Jasper suggested they move in together. They decided on Jane's flat. Convenient location, reasonable price, cozy room. so it was Jasper who moved in with her. But he immediately took upon himself to pay the rent and minor repairs, which every dwelling needs from time to time. And it also turned out that Jasper is an excellent cook. Jane's culinary talents paled in comparison to his skills. Jasper, as befits a creative man, created real masterpieces, whether in the recording studio or in the kitchen. He was gentle, sensitive, and attentive, fully immersed in his work, but not forgetting about his beloved. They talked a lot, often went for walks. Sometimes together they discussed the next song, spinning in Jasper's head and ready to be born. Sometimes Jane would suggest to her lover the right phrase or words. He happily grasped the idea, and then the girl felt proud of herself. How about it? She took part in the creation of a hit. Jane completely dissolved in her feelings and new sensations. Before meeting Jasper, she didn't know what it was love for a man. She hadn't had time for that before. First studying hard, then trying to survive. It turned out to be so pleasant to be near a man who embraces you, interested in your mood and well-being, looking at you with admiring eyes, as at some princess, and to melt from the touch of his warm, strong hands. Knowing that he, this tall man with black eyes, would do anything for you. Ellen didn't approve of her sister's choice. As always, you have your own measure of everything. He's poor, he doesn't even have his own flat. Again, no steady job, no business. He's a musician, he's got his own rock band. So what? Who needs them anyway? There's a lot of these one-day bands, you never know if they're going to be successful. I think you got the wrong guy. With your looks. You shouldn't say that. I have 3 children. Who needs me? So I'm content with what fate gives me, I don't complain. But you. Jane didn't expect her sister to understand, though. They were always too different. But Jane didn't need understanding. She was happy, she was loved. She had someone close and dear to her. Yes, he was going through a difficult time. But Jasper tried, went to his goal, worked hard, looked for the right contacts, planned something. Jane supported him in all his endeavors, and he appreciated her devotion. Many times he said that he was grateful to fate for such a gift for her. One day Jasper made a rather risky venture, invited a famous rock band to Chicago. It was planned that his band would perform as a warm-up act for the famous musicians. This event was to increase the popularity of Jasper's band. Well, and in general, the organization of such concerts is a way to make good money. But something went wrong. Not as many people came to the concert as planned. There was a big rock festival in a neighboring state. Jasper didn't take that into account. Or rather, he found out about the festival too late, when everything was already in full swing. In general, Jasper went into a big disadvantage: payment of musicians' fees, hall rent and equipment, tickets for the rock band, promotional activities. All this was paid off only half of the money from ticket sales. The concert itself went great, but Jasper had huge debts that needed to be closed as soon as possible. But with what? It was hard for Jane to look at her lover. During this period, he looked confused, anxious. I wanted to help him in some way. How? Where did Jane get the money? Jasper took out a loan, but it was a drop in the ocean. His friends helped him, the situation improved, but the debt was still quite substantial. And then Jane offered to help. She had savings, money she'd put aside for her studies. Not much, of course, but still. In addition, the girl did what she was against for a long time, took out a consumer loan. These funds were quite enough to cover the debt. From where? Jasper was surprised when Jane handed him several wads of brand new, crisp notes. I just got paid back out of the blue, plus the insurance. Finally paid off my mobile phone bill, she lied. She knew if she told Jasper the truth, he'd never take the money from her. As it was, it wasn't like it was the last, randomly coming in. Thank you, Jasper hugged Jane tightly. I'll pay you back. You'll see, we'll be famous soon, and I'll pay it all back. Jasper paid the debt and continued to develop the group. Jane slowly paid off the loan. It was no longer possible to save for her studies, and her salary had suddenly become much smaller. The bar had fallen on hard times. It was good that Jasper bought groceries and paid the rent of the flat. That is, he took the main part of the expenses on himself. Jasper's income came from a few corporate gigs and the occasional part-time job. Unsteady income, but still the stream never dried up. Jane didn't worry about the financial side of their relationship. She enjoyed Jasper's attention, bathed in his love and care, and generously gave him tenderness, love, and support. Jane tried not to think about the future. But if she did not recover at the university this year, she would do it next year. It would be all right. She still had time. The main thing is that he, Jasper, is there for her. Jane hadn't realized she was capable of such feelings before. And then Jasper disappeared. No, he hadn't run away from Jane. Nothing terrible had happened to him. It started out as a business trip. Can you imagine Jasper grabbed Jane's shoulder and even shook her a little? His eyes burned like two bright spotlights. I was invited to New York to write music for a band. They found me on the internet, they liked me, and now they're inviting me. Jane couldn't believe her ears. She knew the band Jasper was talking about. They were very popular musicians, touring all over the world, and they had noticed Jasper. They're offering him a collaboration. Unbelievable. I'm going to have to go away for a while, Jasper continued. Do you realize what that means? Jane nodded. She understood money, fame, dizzying opportunities for Jasper's growth and development as a musician, useful acquaintances and connections. Jasper would get things he'd never dreamed of. But it looks like they'll have to part ways indefinitely. After all, Jasper clearly said I have to leave, not we. The packing began. Jasper had a lot of things to sort out. Firstly, he had to find a replacement someone had to play in his band for him temporarily while he was away. Secondly, Jasper had to organize his passport and visa. Thirdly, collecting the necessary things. In all the hustle and bustle, he seemed to have forgotten all about Jane. Jasper was too absorbed in the upcoming changes and prospects. The girl looked at him and realized that he would forget about her in another country, muffled by new impressions, excited by work and success. Perhaps Jasper would even find someone there. But Jasper had hugged her so tenderly in the evenings, so sincerely assured her that he would miss her. And time would fly by quickly. And then there's the video link. We'll be in touch with each other all the time. At least I'll finally earn a decent living, pay you back what I owe you. I know how much you need that money. Maybe we can even buy a flat. My band will get bigger. I'll gain invaluable experience. I'll know what to do and how to do it. It's going to be okay, Jasper said sincerely. Jane could see that he wasn't lying, wasn't deceiving. But something told her that everything would change as soon as her beloved was abroad. It was just that Jasper himself did not realize it yet. And that's how it turned out in the end. At first, Jasper called every day, as promised, and told her how he had settled down in his new place. Everything delighted him, and he was overwhelmed by the experience. And then he suddenly dropped off the radar. He just disappeared. He didn't call himself, and he didn't answer Jane's calls. The long ring-back tones ended steadily with the message that the caller was probably busy, so he couldn't answer. Jane was alarmed at first. She thought that something had happened to him, something terrible, irreparable. But soon she saw the band playing on the music channel. Jasper was with them. He looked different, older and more serious than usual. I mean, there was nothing wrong with him. It's just that he'd apparently decided to start a new life and cut all ties, including forgetting about her. And Jane? At first, the girl still hoped, waited for him to call, to explain everything. But Jasper was gone, completely out of her life. Jane made it a habit to watch the music channel every day. Every now and then she'd see Jasper. He was never the center of attention, but he was still caught in the camera lens sometimes. And quite often there was a girl next to him, the same one, either a makeup artist or the band's costumer. Beautiful, colorful. Apparently there was something between her and Jasper, couldn't help but be. Jane was desperately jealous of Jasper, both of this girl and of the other potential women of her lover. She was hurt as she had ever been, and also hurt and scared. Scared of being alone again, without the support, the warmth of a loved one, an unpleasant mixture of feelings and emotions. And there were other problems more pressing. Money. Jane was barely making ends meet. After all, she had a tiny salary and a loan. Eventually, the bar went bankrupt. The new owners bought it and turned it into a hookah lounge. Jane had to quit like all the other employees. Another blow. Jane had special memories and feelings about this place. And now the bar was gone a cozy bar where she could always enjoy live music, where there was a friendly, warm atmosphere. Jasper would understand, support her. Everything was easier and more pleasant with him in general. But he was hundreds of kilometers away from her and seemed to have forgotten all about her. Jasper had no idea how desperate she was. He never found out about the loan. He thought Jane had helped him out with the extra money she'd suddenly received. And of course he had no idea she'd been fired. And if he did, what would he care about her now? Jane had no time to go over her grievances and think about what it would be like if she was in desperate need of a job, and preferably a decent paying one. And that's why she was tirelessly perusing the adverts. She wanted to find something that would help her get out of the financial hole. Good, at least the owner of the flat agreed to wait with payment. But he's got a lot of patience too. Jane would be asked to leave in a heartbeat. The ad caught Jane's eye with the amount of money they were offering for her services. Not a bad figure. It could solve a lot of the girl's problems, but the job itself seemed too unfamiliar to her. A carer was needed for a little girl. It didn't seem to specify the diagnosis, but whoever had advertised it had made it clear that the child needed round-the-clock care and supervision, including taking medication by the hour, accompanying her to procedures, and so on. Jane reflected. She had experience in caring for babies. Thank you, Ellen, to her mentor. The girl even enjoyed fiddling with her nephews. She knew how to get along with small children, knew how to feed them, change them, keep them occupied. But here we were talking about a sick child, apparently seriously ill. Could she do it? At least it was worth a try. Jane called the number given, and a pleasant male voice answered. The man asked her a few questions: age, occupation, education, experience with small children. And she was invited for an interview. Jane was nervous the day before. She wanted the job. Jane needed it like air. It was a chance to get out of a financial hole, to stay afloat. Where else would you find a salary like that? That's why Jane was worried, anxious. What if she didn't get the job? What then to look for a place as a waitress again? To work for a pittance? The taxi brought Jane to a country cottage village, an elite neighborhood, tall, beautiful houses surrounded by fences. At the gate, the girl was met by a woman, an au pair. As Jane found out later, in fact, the person who did everything: cleaning, cooking, laundry. Because her employer, Kevin, was always too busy. Businessmen in general have very little free time. Kevin met the job applicants in the living room. He was a man in his 40s with intelligent, piercing blue eyes, perfectly styled hair with light gray. An athletic figure. Yes, this man obviously paid attention to health and appearance. Jane was even embarrassed at first. How to start a conversation with someone like that? She suddenly seemed insignificant next to him. Good morning, Kevin smiled warmly. Jane's embarrassment vanished. The man's smile was open, and the kind Kevin seemed at once like a man of his own. Hello, Jane smiled back. I'm here to see you. That's very good. I'll tell you straight away. I need a carer for my daughter, Melissa. She's in really bad shape right now. So it's not for everyone. She's being monitored by the paramedics. They're here every day. I could hire a nurse for Melissa, but how can I tell you this? There's a lot of pain in her life already. A lot of people in white coats. I wish there was someone else there for her. You know, a young girl like you. Cheerful, who knows a lot of songs and fairy tales, who can cheer up a child, inspire him, come up with some interesting activity, in general, to brighten up her leisure time. Why? What's wrong with your girl? Jane just couldn't help but ask the question. Kevin lowered his eyes. His face darkened in an instant, becoming anxious and tense. Melissa, she's been tested everywhere. No one could figure anything out. It's like her body is destroying itself. There's no sign of autoimmune aggression. She's been getting tests all the time. They do, but she's fading, and nothing helps her. Poor baby, Jane exclaimed. The doctors are doing what they can. I have the means, as you can see, but they're not all powerful, unfortunately. Anyway, Melissa needs more than just a nanny. That's where we have Vivian, our favorite au pair. She'll feed her and give her medication on time, and we don't just need a carer either. Melissa has nurses to look after her and do all the necessary treatments. What Melissa needs is more like, a friend or something. Someone who can bring her positive emotions. The doctors say it's very important in her condition. And looking at you, I think you're just that young, beautiful, funny, and you have a kind look in your eye. You know how to empathize. That's good. Jane nodded. She was anxious to see the little girl. She needed positive emotions, and she would give them to her. Jane would cheer up a girl who had such a serious illness, brighten up the gray everyday life of the little patient, find a way to make her life more pleasant. If you're ready to get to work right now, Kevin continued, let's start a trial period. Let's say 3 days, and then it's up to Melissa to decide. Of course, you'll be paid for your time anyway. Do you agree? Yes, Jane nodded. That's good, Kevin said happily. Then Vivienne will introduce you to Melissa. I've got to go, I've got things to do. As the door shut behind Kevin, Vivienne, a middle-aged woman with a surprisingly soft and cozy look, turned to Jane with a question. Have you ever interacted with little kids before? Do you know what little kids are like? I have nephews, Jane nodded. That's good, Vivienne shook her head. Except our Melissa, she's an unusual child. You realize that yourself. I guess Melissa hardly ever gets out of bed. She gets tired quickly. It's hard to keep her interested in anything, but you have to. Melissa needs to be distracted from her pain, from her torment, and she needs to be walked at least an hour a day. That's what the doctors said. I get it. Well, let's go and meet her now, Vivienne said. Jane followed Vivienne to the first floor and entered the nursery. It was the princess's spacious room. A huge window let in a lot of daylight. Along the walls were racks of expensive toys and books. Right in the center of the room was a mini playground. There was a slide, swings, and even a trampoline. A little further away was a ball pool, and closer to the door was a bed. What kind of bed was it? It was large, round, with a pink canopy. Jane looked around curiously. She had never seen a room like this before. Was it really all for one child? In the midst of this splendor, Jane did not immediately notice the little mistress of the room. She was lying in bed surrounded by large, soft toys. There was a soft cat, a fluffy white bear, a bright green crocodile with flowers all over its body, and a thin, pale 7-year-old girl, completely transparent and almost blending in with the white bedclothes because of her unhealthy skin color. Huge blue eyes, like her father's, looked at the entrance with curiosity. Melissa propped herself up on her elbows, though it cost her great effort, and turned to Vivienne. Who's that with you? The new rehab doctor? The difficult word came off the little girl's lips easily and habitually, and it was somehow completely unnatural. No, honey, this is your new friend. Her name is Jane. Are you going to play dolls together? Melissa perked up a little. Whatever you want to play. Jane smiled at her. The girl was both sympathetic and pitiful. I really like to play with dolls. That's good. Vivienne doesn't have time. And Daddy can't play at all, Melissa said. Grown-ups have a lot to do, Jane shrugged. That's why they can be boring sometimes. Right, Melissa suggested. And the conspirators smiled. Boring, Jane agreed. Melissa laughed softly. Well, I can see you're going to be fine. You two have fun, Vivienne said. She looked really happy. I'm going to go make dinner. Oh, and Melissa, you remember the nurse is coming to see you today, right? I remember. The girl frowned. More IVs. But where can I go? Sweet Vivienne kissed the girl on the top of her head and left the room. Jane was left alone with Melissa. Shall we play? With a smile, the girl turned to her ward. You have so many beautiful toys here. I can't keep my eyes open. Better read to me, the girl asked. The short conversation seemed to have drained her of her energy. Melissa sank down on the pillows and pulled the blanket over her skinny body, even though the room was warm. Good, Jane agreed. She was surprised at the weakness of this 7-year-old. They seemed energetic, like Andrew, Jane's eldest nephew, who was just the same age as Annie. But you can't get him to sit still for 5 minutes. He's always up to something, making things up. If the boy were in this room, He'd be jumping on a trampoline or going down a slide. Lassie calls him a perpetual motion machine, and so does Lillian. Chris and Chris are the same, even though they're younger. Melissa, on the other hand, poor thing, is lying on her back. What do you want to read? Princesses. There's a book on the windowsill. Vivian started to read to me, but she never has time, she said. It was a heavy, beautiful book with bright pictures, but the story itself seemed silly, boring, predictable, and formulaic. She herself did not like such fairy tales in her childhood. Let's make up our own story about these princesses, Jane suggested. Melissa's tired eyes flashed with interest. How? She asked. Very simple. I start, you continue. Melissa was fascinated by the activity. She was inspired to invent adventures for the princess. She was riding in a racing car. The heroine was kidnapped by a dragon and then rescued by a prince. The girl's imagination was running wild, which seemed to surprise Melissa herself. Then Vivian entered the room. Seeing that Jane and Melissa were getting along, she was pleased. The woman brought lunch: mashed soup, stewed vegetables. I don't want any, Melissa said, wincing. I don't want anything. I don't want any of this. Vivian looked at Jane, clearly expecting her to help. Let me feed you, Jane turned to the girl. Each spoonful is another princess adventure. I'll make them up as I go along. Can you imagine how much I'll have to tell you? Which do you think will finish first, your food or my imagination? It worked. The food ended faster than Jane's fantasy. But Melissa demanded more stories. Vivienne splayed her hands in surprise, smiled, and walked out. Soon a nurse entered the nursery. Melissa immediately darkened. She was almost asleep. Lunch and history had tired her out. But it was time for treatments. IVs? She asked the nurse hopelessly. She nodded sympathetically. I'll do it quickly. Don't worry, it won't hurt. You'll sleep later, and we'll have tea. Vivian pulled Jane's sleeve. Aren't you needed here now? The AU pair led Jane into the spacious kitchen. Smoky cups of coffee and a flavorful cake that looked like it had just come out of the oven were waiting on the table. You and Melissa are getting along, I see. The woman smiled, looking warmly at Jane. That's good. Melissa kicked her previous nanny out, but she's taken to you. I've already called Kevin and told him all about it. He's very pleased and excited. He said to keep you safe. I'm glad too. Jane smiled. Melissa is just too bad. My nephews are so noisy, so cheerful, and she's lying in bed, not even able to play, nothing to play with. It's scary. What did the doctors say? Are there any chances? No prognosis. Vivian shook her head. They can't even diagnose her. They just dismiss the symptoms, that's all. Melissa's going to be better after the drip. You can take her for a walk after her afternoon nap for a while. Vivian continued her story. Kevin, Melissa's father, I understand. Where's her mum? On a business trip. Does she have a demanding job too, so she can't babysit her daughter? Vivian sighed. I wish. Lassie, Melissa's mum, isn't alive. The birth was complicated. The doctors tried to save the baby and didn't realize the mother needed help. And Lassie wasn't complaining about anything, just worried about the baby. That's how it all worked out. The day after the birth, Lassie developed a high fever. Checkups, intensive care, one thing led to another. Her heart stopped. Poor thing had some kind of internal bleeding. It's a rare case. And then there was Melissa in the NICU because she was born prematurely. It was a tough time. It's a shame, I agreed. That's a shame. Let me tell you the whole story, Vivian said. It looks like you're going to be with us for a while, so you should know. Kevin grew up in a happy, full family. A loving mom and dad, caring, attentive grandparents. A room of his own. Trips to the seaside every summer, birthdays. Friends. Kevin had a happy childhood, no less happy youth. He graduated from high school with honors. Thanks in large part to parents who cared about their son's education. If they saw gaps, they immediately hired Kevin the best tutors. And the boy studied English in foreign camps. He had a holiday and got an education at once. Vouchers to such places were not cheap, and it was not easy to get them. But what can't you do for the sake of your favorite son, especially if he is so desirable and long-awaited? Kevin's parents were old enough, they had not been able to have a child for many years. The couple resigned themselves to such a fate. But then, when there was no hope left, life suddenly gave them a surprise, finally gave them an heir. Needless to say, since then, all the attention of his mother and father indiscriminately belonged to Kevin. He was never shy of his parents, despite the fact that they were much older than the parents of his classmates. But Kevin, on the contrary, was proud of his parents. His father was a well-known businessman in the city, and his mother was the head doctor of a regional hospital. They were known and respected by everyone. It never occurred to Kevin to be ashamed of his parents. Kevin grew up. His parents were rapidly aging, giving up. When the guy was in his third year of university, his father died. Stroke, intensive care, coma, and that was it. Kevin felt like an adult for the first time. After all, he, a student, had to get into the affairs of the company, which his parents left him by inheritance. Since he was a teenager, Kevin had been interested in his father's business. He knew a lot of things, even had the right to sign. Yet for the first time, he had entrusted most of the processes to the board manager, a longtime friend of his departed parent. Because Kevin needed to study and support his mother, who had given up a lot after the death of her spouse. 3 years passed. Kevin had just received his diploma, had just taken over his father's company, had just started to gain strength. And then there was another blow, Mom this time. The boy was left all alone. Kevin felt miserable and lonely in his parents' big house. It was good that Vivian, the au pair and almost a member of the family, was there. She had known Kevin as a baby and treated him as her son. The woman had no children of her own. She gave all her care to the young man who had lost both his parents one after the other. It's been hard on him, Vivian shook her head. He was just a boy, and here he was. It was his job that pulled him through. He had to make decisions, go places, hold meetings, sign contracts, that sort of thing. That's what saved him. It's been a while. Kevin turned from a young, inexperienced guy into an intelligent, purposeful man, a talented businessman. Vivienne was pleased to see her mentee. He had grown older, stronger, more self-confident. The au pair wished Kevin would find a good wife, marry her, and become a father. Then Vivian's heart would be at peace. Only he didn't have anyone special. Vivian said no. There were some girls hanging around Kevin. He was a prominent, wealthy bloke. They're always popular. Except that one of them didn't work out, and he didn't feel anything for the other. They weren't to his heart's content. And Vivian didn't trust them. It seemed like all they wanted from him was money. They made eyes at him. And then Lassie showed up. Kevin met Lassie literally on the street. She was in a hurry to get somewhere, as it turned out later, for a job interview at Kevin's firm. Lassie had recently been downsized. The factory where she had worked as an accountant for several years after college had suddenly closed. So Lassie was looking for a new position. Kevin went out for a walk to get some air. He even had a goal to buy donuts at the bakery around the corner. And then fate collided the two men, literally. Lassie jumped out of the corner too quickly and ran into the unsuspecting Kevin. It was like a romantic music video. The bag slipped off Lassie's shoulder, its contents scattering across the pavement. Kevin and Lassie rushed to pick it up. The girl apologized. Kevin assured her it was all right and admired the stranger's beautiful gray eyes. It was love at first sight. When the young people had sorted out the bag and the things that had fallen out of it, they rose synchronously and smiled at each other. Kevin, like a man, made the first move. He learnt the name of the beautiful stranger and then introduced himself. They walked leisurely and talked, getting to know each other. When Kevin found out that Lassie was rushing to his office, he realized that this beautiful girl was his destiny. And it was no accident that they met in such an interesting way, rather than seeing each other for the first time in the office. It was more romantic, more interesting, more pleasant. In short, it was a real romance. Vivian had never seen Kevin so happy. Lassie turned out to be intelligent, understanding, kind. She quickly found a rapport with Vivian, too, which was important. Sweet, sweet girl. And for what? And just such a fate. Vivian shook her head sadly. A couple of years after they met, Kevin and Lassie got married. It was a wonderful couple, harmonious and happy. There was love, understanding, and respect between the couple. Vivian rejoiced when she saw them together, her beloved Kevin and his wonderful, beautiful wife. They decided not to rush into having children, Vivian continued. It was their common decision. It was like they felt something. They traveled, worked, met friends. And I, the fool, was advising them in my senile way not to delay it. I wanted to babysit their baby. But Kevin and Lassie lived on their own for 5 years after they got married. Were they happy together? No, they wanted kids, but not right away, later, until they were happy. And then the news of Lassie's pregnancy. It was an unplanned event, but the whole household welcomed it. Well, it's about time, Lassie summarized. The baby decided he'd had enough of waiting. Thank God. Vivian shook her hands. I think you're going to have a boy. You look so pretty now, Lassie. Girls take beauty from their mothers when they're pregnant. But the AU pair was wrong. The ultrasound confirmed that Lassie was having a girl. A healthy, strong one. They showed me a picture of her. They take pictures of a baby in the womb nowadays. I looked at her, and she looked just like Lassie. That's how Melissa was born, just like her mom. Melissa. It was Lassie who chose the name for her daughter. Kevin and Vivian didn't mind. They both liked it very much. The pregnancy hadn't been easy. At first, Lassie was suffering from toxicosis, then it seemed to recede, but it was replaced by other problems: high blood pressure, edema. The child developed well, but the mother suffered, melting before her eyes, refusing to eat, lying down a lot. The usually energetic Lassie didn't even have the strength to go downstairs. Vivian carried her food straight to her bedroom. The woman felt sorry for Lassie, helped her as much as she could, and assured her that things would not be easy after the birth of her daughter. Children are for women, Vivian sighed. Pregnancy had taken its toll on Lassie. That depends. Jane shrugged, remembering her sister. Her children had been relatively easy. Anyway, Lassie had gone into labor much earlier than expected. The threat of miscarriage had been diagnosed throughout the pregnancy, so fortunately the mother-to-be was in the hospital under the supervision of doctors at that moment. They tried to stop the process, but failed. Melissa was born premature, weak. She didn't scream. She wasn't put on Lassie's chest. She wasn't even shown to her. Things are different when it comes to newborns who need to stay in the womb for at least 3 more months. Melissa was immediately sent to the NICU. There was a fight for her life. And Lassie seemed fine at first. I mean, she was tired, of course, after giving birth. Well, she was worried about her daughter. She was worried sick. It's all understandable. Understandable and natural, Vivian said. The doctors examined the woman in labor, found no abnormalities, and sent her to the ward. It was only later that serious symptoms appeared, but it was too late. Kevin and I were worried about the girl, Vivian said, almost crying. It was obvious that even now, 7 years later, it was hard for her to remember it. We thought the baby wouldn't survive. She was born too early. She was too weak. And then, when in the morning Kevin received a call from the hospital and was told that his wife had died of internal bleeding, he could not believe his ears. He thought it was Melissa. His mind refused to accept what he was hearing. But no, Melissa had pulled through. She was a stronger girl. But Lassie was gone. Kevin went gray, didn't sleep or eat for months. I thought he'd gone too. Vivian stopped talking. But he did. I had work to do, Melissa to pull. To be honest, he hadn't been very good to his daughter at first. Vivian blamed Lassie for what happened to her. She knew it was wrong, but she couldn't help it. She was just angry with her. Melissa was discharged home and a nanny was hired for her. Someone had to look after the baby. Vivian was too old for that. But she enjoyed playing with the girl. Melissa took her around the yard in her prom and talked to her a lot. And she was the only one who gave the newborn the love she needed. My father wasn't capable of that at the time. She's like a granddaughter to me, the au pair smiled. I took to her right away. But Kevin. He shunned the child for a long time, bought everything he needed for her, and sometimes went for a walk with her. But that was if Vivian made him. He never took the initiative. Then one day Melissa got sick, high fever. Nothing helped. She was vomiting, poor thing. It was the flu. A lot of people got it back then, and the little ones took it particularly badly, Vivian said. But anyway, Melissa was back in hospital again. The doctors had no prognosis. And that's when Kevin came to his senses, dropped everything. He sat by his daughter's bedside 24 hours a day, singing songs to her, telling her poems, rocking her in his arms. And it was as if Melissa felt her father's care. She was on the mend immediately. Their little girl was discharged, and Kevin became completely different with her, a real father, loving and caring. Life went on as usual. Kevin worked hard, but always found time to spend with his daughter. Melissa grew up, pleased her father and Vivian with her excellent health and rare intelligence, and everything seemed to be fine. Except that Vivian was worried that Kevin was all alone. It seemed to her that he would not be happy until he met a woman. Only now it was a very difficult task. For Kevin's chosen one, she had to love and accept Melissa. Otherwise, any union was out of the question. Well, God has heard my prayers, Vivian smiled. And Kevin had a beautiful Samantha. I can't take my eyes off her. Smart too. She's got a kid herself, a little girl a little younger than Melissa. It's a great family. Samantha got a job with Kevin, and it all started at some corporate event. It's pretty standard stuff. Samantha was good to Melissa. She often took her and her youngest daughter out to an amusement park or to the cinema. Melissa grew to love both Samantha and her little half-sister Annie. She was truly happy. Kevin and Samantha got married and started living together, and then Annie started having these symptoms. First dizziness, then nausea, weakness, no appetite. Examination in the best clinics, trips to doctors abroad, consultations of famous professors, all this did not give any result. Doctors could not make the correct diagnosis. The girl was melting before our eyes. The first year she was still fine. She was still on her feet. Vivian almost cried again. It was obvious that her heart was truly hurting for the little girl. After New Year's Eve, she was quite ill. And now I am so frightened for her. I don't know what kind of illness has attacked our little girl. Samantha and her daughter moved into her flat temporarily. Annie was in daycare, and it was too dangerous for Melissa to get infections from there. So Samantha and Kevin made that decision. And it comes from Samantha a lot. Every day almost, Vivian continued. She's a good girl. She brings Melissa fair gifts. She brings Annie some too when she's not sick. But when she went to the garden, it started. Sick day after sick day. So it turns out. They have a wife with one child separately, the husband with the eldest daughter separately. Such a family. Well, where to go? That's the situation. It's a strange situation, Jane said. She was shocked by Kevin and Melissa's story. It's like a TV show. Well, that's just the way it is. The older woman waved her hands. Melissa, I see she's getting along with you, and that's good, she said. Everything will be nicer now. Days went by. Jane now lived in the room next to Annie's nursery, but the girl often asked Nanny to stay the night in her bedroom. Melissa had a very comfortable sofa there. Jane made herself a bed on it. They talked before bedtime, holding hands. Jane saw Melissa's problems. It was very important. The girl clearly lacked attention, even though there were many adults around her. Kevin was a very caring and anxious father, a pleasant man to be around. They often had conversations about Melissa. The man always listened attentively to Jane, did not interrupt or argue, asked the right questions. Jane also got to know Samantha. Vivian was right. Indeed, she was a very beautiful woman. Chiseled cheekbones, beautifully curved lips, the grace of a panther, a true queen. But when Samantha interacted with Melissa, when she adjusted Melissa's blanket, smiled and stroked her head, Jane couldn't shake the feeling that the woman was a hypocrite. It was evident in seemingly insignificant details as well. A cold glint in her eyes, a squeamish movement of her lips, something elusive and very unpleasant. One day Jane had a strange dream. The girl found herself in some room, ragged wallpaper, creaky floors. She sat on a stool by a dark window, through which nothing could be seen, and realized that she was asleep. She wanted to wake up, but for some reason she couldn't. And then Jane did not even realize where she had come from. Lassie appeared as if out of thin air. Jane recognized her because she had seen Melissa's mother in pictures. Lassie smiled sadly and looked at Jane with a warm and very soft gaze. "Watch her," she said in a quiet, illogical voice. "Watch out for Samantha. She's the trouble. She's dangerous." Lassie vanished into thin air. And Jane had so many questions she wanted to ask her. Watch her how? What? Was she dangerous? Jane woke up in a cold sweat. Or rather, as if Jane had flown into her body, fallen into it. It was a strange sensation. Lassie's words were still echoing in her head. No, Jane didn't believe in the supernatural. But the dream, which was little more than a dream, was more like a journey through time and worlds. The strange dream just wouldn't let go. The next day, Samantha was gone, and Jane waited for her. She knew for sure this woman was involved in something bad. Samantha is somehow hurting this family and doesn't like Melissa. She doesn't sympathize with the girl, she just pretends to care. And how come the others don't notice this? Even the experienced, long-lived Vivienne. Samantha turned up the next day, as beautiful as ever, brightly colored, languid. First thing she did was go up to Annie's to say hello. Then she went down to the kitchen. "Melissa's thirsty," Samantha said, looking at Vivienne. "Let me make her some cocoa." "Come on," said the au pair, fussing. "No, I can manage. I feel like it. I want to do something for her." "You're so thoughtful." Jane was silent. She watched Samantha like Lassie had asked her to in the dream. Somehow it felt like this was the big moment. It was as if Lassie were there, telling her to be vigilant. Vivienne was tinkering with the test. Jane pretended to look out the window, but she was watching Samantha. And there she was, the woman deftly pulled a small vial from her sleeve, dripped a few drops into the milk, and immediately hid the bottle back. Only a couple of seconds, a few deft movements, but Jane saw everything. "The drink for the princess is ready." Samantha smiled. "Jane, hand me her favorite cup, please." Jane obeyed. She watched in silence as Samantha poured cocoa into Melissa's mug with a picture of Melissa's favorite cartoon characters, and realized Melissa shouldn't drink it. She shouldn't. She should act on it. Jane pretended to slip. She bumped into Samantha, who dropped the cup out of her hands, the mug falling and shattering. "Cocoa spilled on the floor?" "I'm sorry, I'm so clumsy." Jane fidgeted, grabbed a rag, started wiping up the puddle, picking up the shards. "It's okay. I'll do it again." Samantha's voice was filled with poorly concealed irritation. Jane couldn't do it a second time. It would arouse suspicion. So she had to accept the fact that Melissa would get the cocoa from her stepmother's hands. While Samantha and Vivienne were at Melissa's, Jane squeezed the rag she used to wipe the cocoa into an empty tomato paste jar. She was going to take the liquid to be analyzed today. She needed to know exactly what Samantha had put in the cocoa. Maybe it was just vitamins. Then there was no point in panicking. But something told her it wasn't. She had to wait 2 days for the test results. When Jane saw the statement, she was horrified. The drink contained poison, deadly, causing symptoms similar to those of Annie. So the girl's weakness was due to her stepmother systematically poisoning her, just like in a fairy tale. Jane didn't know who to turn to with her news. Vivienne? What could she do? Kevin? He wouldn't believe her. What do we do? Samantha can't be allowed anywhere near the girl. She wants to send her to the afterlife, and she's almost succeeded in that endeavor. Still, Jane plucked up the courage to talk to Kevin. She told him everything about her terrible dream, about the cocoa, and about the examination. Jane was afraid that he would shout, start to kick her out, or accuse her of wanting to hurt his daughter. "You know," Kevin said, looking at Jane, "I'd probably fire you right away if you'd said that." "It's very strange," agreed. "But just yesterday I had an unusual dream too, Lassie. And she asked me to trust you, just trust, nothing more. Why don't you just keep this to yourself for now and take some time off? I need to sort this out. Vera Antonovna will call you when you can go back to work." Jane spent those few days on pins and needles. She didn't know what was going on at Kevin's house, and she was very worried about Melissa, who had already grown fond of her. But Kevin had said to wait for the call, so she would wait. Vera Antonovna called. Jane, seeing her name on the screen, became anxious. What would they tell her now? How did it go? "Come over." was all Vera Antonovna said. "We have such a thing here. Come quickly. Melissa misses you. Very much." Jane didn't have to beg long. Half an hour later, she was at Kevin's house. The owner opened the door, still as calm and unruffled as ever. It was hard to guess from his appearance what had happened. "I want to thank you," the man finally allowed himself to smile. "You were right. Samantha, she really wanted to. I'm afraid to say it out loud. That bastard wanted to poison Melissa?" Vera Antonovna shook her head. "You'd have to think. And I trusted her so much." The story turned out to be banal and as old as the world. Samantha was not going to put up with a rival in the form of her wealthy husband's favorite daughter. She wanted her own daughter Annie to be the sole heir to Kevin's fortune. Well, herself first, of course. Samantha had once trained as a pharmacist, but she never worked a day in her profession, preferring to live off rich admirers. Nature has generously endowed her with beauty, so that the opportunities for such an existence the woman had. Received in college knowledge was enough to think of a way to send the hated stepdaughter to the other side of the world. A poison that's hard to find in blood and tissue unless you look for it. Samantha put the toxic substance in the food she cooked for Melissa. And the girl was weakening, slowly fading away. We were only a short distance away from the target. It's mind-boggling. It's unbelievable. Vera Antonovna could not calm down yet. Jane understood her. Indeed, Samantha's act was monstrous. How could she do such a thing to a defenseless child? Melissa trusted her, loved her. So Kevin installed surveillance cameras in the kitchen. It turns out Samantha was poisoning Melissa's food every time she ate it. Sometimes she cooked something for the girl herself, and sometimes she'd drip it from a vial into the food, probably prepared by the housekeeper. "I used my own hands to take it to Melissa." The poisoned Vivian shook her head. Anyway, Samantha had been caught red-handed. She was under investigation. Annie was taken in by her father, a man who had wanted to have contact with the child for a long time, but he wasn't allowed to because he was too poor for it, too unworthy. "Melissa, and everything will be fine," Vivian assured Vivian. It wasn't the child's fault that his mother wanted to do this. "And Melissa, how is she?" Jane asked. "Melissa's fine," came from somewhere behind her. Jane turned round and met Melissa's eyes. She was still very thin and pale, but she already had the strength to walk around the house. A real miracle. The doctor said she'll recover quickly now. Vivian smiled. Jane and Jasper walked slowly along the shelves of the children's shop. It was the girls' section, so they both felt as if they were in a realm of pink and purple dolls, cosmetics, soft toys. It was mind-boggling. "When I was in San Francisco, a guy bought his nephew a voice-controlled robot. That's the stuff. Maybe Melissa would like something like that," Jasper suggested. "She's a girl," Jane reminded him. "And she definitely wants a doll, a cartoon character. We should try to find one. Maybe next birthday she won't want toys at all. Kids grow up so fast." "It's amazing. We'll soon see for ourselves." Jasper put his hand on Jane's rounded belly. The baby responded immediately with a still weak but palpable push. A year ago, right after Melissa had been rescued from her evil stepmother, Jane had been in for another surprise. She continued to live next door to Melissa. She was quickly on the mend, mastered active games, asked to take her for walks all over Los Angeles. The girl was still very attached to Jane, and she still needed a job. And Jane had already got used to everyone to the girl Vivian. Even Kevin did not want to part with them. The adults had initially decided not to tell Melissa the truth about what had happened to her. Too terrible story. But the sensible girl managed to put two and two together, heard something, thought of something herself. "It's just like in fairy tales," the girl shrugged her shoulders. The little girl was coming back to life. In September, she went to school with her peers, and Jane was finally able to return to the university, chose a correspondence course, because she had to not only study, but also work. However, her work was more like life in a family with relatives: sweet, cheerful Melissa, kind, wise Vivian, always busy, but polite and attentive Kevin. With these people, Jane was cozy, warm, and comfortable. They accepted her and were very grateful to her for saving Melissa. It's scary to think what could have happened if it hadn't been for that terrible dream they discussed this unusual event. First, Lassie had dreamt about Jane, then Kevin. Vivian was sure of it. Lassie had broken through time and space to save her little girl. Kevin only shook his head and didn't offer an opinion. And Jane? She didn't know what to think. Perhaps Samantha had aroused her suspicions right away. After all, she hadn't liked Melissa's stepmother at first sight. More likely, Jane ran the thoughts through her head. It was possible that they'd been transformed into unusual dreams. Except Kevin had dreamed about Lassie too and asked him to believe Jane. That afternoon, Jane left the house alone. Melissa was studying. Vivian was doing chores around the house. Jane had to drive to the university to drop off some papers at the dean's office. Suddenly, Jasper stepped towards her. Jane couldn't believe her eyes. The sight of him made the hair on her head stand on end. And him? He looked happy and confused, smiling, looking at Jane as if there were no one more important to him in the world. "I found you at last," he said, and he held her close to him. Jane understood nothing, but she did not resist. She snuggled against the man she loved, enjoyed his closeness, and tried not to think of Jasper's betrayal, of his sudden disappearance. The explanation turned out to be ridiculously simple. Jasper simply dropped his phone into the ocean during a boat trip. Naturally, the gadget disappeared irretrievably. Jane wasn't registered on social media, so he simply couldn't contact her. No way. Jasper wrote letters like the old days letters and telegrams. But Jane had moved in with Kevin and was hardly ever home. So the letters piled up in the letterbox and then somehow disappeared. "I remember this moment," Jane said. "I came home one day and saw that the letterbox door was broken. Someone had opened the box and taken the letters for some reason. Maybe kids? Maybe a nosy neighbor. In short, you never heard from me, so you thought I'd forgotten about you. Started a new life," betrayed Jasper continued. "I couldn't just drop everything and leave. It was about my career and our future, our well-being. It was unbearable without you, without news of you. But I knew I would have to wait, and then I would be financially secure for many years to come. And then I could fly to you and explain everything. I didn't realize how much trouble you were in. I didn't know you had to take out a loan. I didn't know anything about you quitting your job. It's been so hard on you." That's it. Just an unfortunate coincidence. Jane was glad that her feelings and Jasper's were real, that there was no betrayal or deceit in her life. Just a misunderstanding that had finally been resolved. Jasper now had a contract with a well-known producer in the capital. He had everything he dreamed of: concerts, gigs, tours, opportunities to take his music to people who were ready to accept it. And money. Money, of course. Jasper had even managed to buy a flat for the two of them. It was in the middle of a renovation. Jasper and Jane were married. They were already expecting a child. Jane felt happy and loved. She didn't work for Kevin anymore. And a stronger, more mature Melissa didn't need a 24-hour nanny. But they were all still friends. And right now, Jane and Jasper were picking out a 9th birthday present for Melissa that might not have been.